Well, thank you very much for that. Am I on to just check with Will? It's all good. Thank you very much for that very lovely obituary. And thank you all for being sent. I'm Brian Dolan, and I'm a Celt. So what we're doing is we're live streaming around the world, so I'm kind of limited to where I walk around. That's why I also ask you all to come this side, so we'll put the energy around here. So what we're going to talk about for the next 18 hours is, the framework is a model called Today, which I'll walk you through, and it's over the next, until 12 p.m. We're going to cover things like safer, NPJ paralysis, home first, red to green, but also some personal leadership stuff. It's like a subversive leadership session. And if you think at midday the way you think right now, then I'll let you down. Because this morning is about thinking and reframing how we see healthcare, and sometimes also how we see ourselves. As I said, the framework I'll put it around is a model that was co-created. And what I'll also do, and I'll send it through to Geraldine and Jason or Rebecca, I'm going to create a PDF of the whole slides deck so that you can have access to it. So I've got a philosophy which is, when it comes to knowledge, be a spendthrift, not a miser. Knowledge that is not shared widely is actually not knowledge at all. It's just hoarded and actually of very limited use. So I'll ensure you have that, but I'll also have there's a PDF of links to valuing patient time, blogs, films, case studies, and so on. And also, I'll reference a whole bunch of stuff, and I'll provide a reading list of books for you as well. Because this is the thing when it comes to reading and learning, is that while not all readers lead, every leader is a reader. And it's really important we read well beyond the confines of our disciplines and our specialties to the broader understanding of the world around us. But what we're going to talk about time, the Today model was co-created by Linda Holt, CEO of Health Service 360, who's an emergency nurse by professional background. And we sat in a coffee shop a couple of Christmases ago in Stratford-on-Avon, and we were kicking around an idea of how do you create a change framework, as you do over coffee, a change framework which will be around valuing people's time. Although it transcends healthcare, because we've been using it with other organizations as well, it is around these things. And time is the connecting currency of healthcare. How do you value people's time? Ownership is how, when people believe what you believe, how do you engage them to, oh my gosh, see, my parole officer has said this thing, so I look fabulous in the dark with my back turned. Ownership is how do people, engage people in how they believe what you believe. Diagnostics is, what does good look like? How do you know you're making a difference? Actions is around, what it is do you do? And finally, and perhaps centrally, is you. What do you believe in? What will you stand for? What will you stand against? What matters most to you? So that's if you like, the overarching theme of the morning. But I believe that it's time that is the connecting currency of healthcare, not money. And how do we maximize patient time? How do we value that time as central? But it's axiomatic to me, in order to value patient time, we must also value staff time as well. And the three greatest challenges we face globally are the money. And the problem is, though, with the money, is that people are overly focused on it when it comes to health systems. You can't fix a deficit focusing on a deficit. If you put all the energies into addressing the finances, quality will too often be sacrificed. And it's interesting listening on Radio 4 this morning, driving through, that I think it's Liverpool Community Health Trust has, there's been a really critical report that's just emerged. And I think there's a couple of hundred deaths, something like 43,000 uninvestigated or not understood incidents. But several years ago, when they first started on the road to become a foundation trust, all the focus was on saving money. So they started from a slash and burn mentality of cutting jobs, cutting funding, And now that has a consequence. And mid-staffs was that as well. As we know, the focus was around the money. Now, having said that, in Liverpool and in mid-staffs, there were some fantastic nurses, doctors, therapists, managers, because not everywhere is all bad. Not everywhere is all good either. But it's not all bad. But if you focus on the money, you have the wrong conversations. And I have the great blessing and good fortune of working in Canterbury District Health Board, which is where first we met with Geraldine when she and a couple of others came over. And great friend and colleague Richard Hamilton has been here, and Ken Stewart, who I know some of you met as a physiotherapist, about what are the lessons that have been learned from Canterbury, which is one of the highest performing health systems in the world that can be transferred. And one of the bits around Canterbury is we don't talk about the money. Because you talk about the money, you're talking about the wrong conversations, and it drives. If people are more focused on the cost centre than the care, it's the wrong conversation. And it's very much a high trust, low bureaucracy environment which is integrated across all the systems and silos. The other bit that's important to stress about money now is this: we have enough. In fact, we have more than we need. What we face is extensive waste. We have substantial waste in health systems around the world. And I was doing some work in Dartford and Gravesend, trusted our 6 cohorts, and there was multi-disc, properly multi has been running it for a number of years now in Canterbury, New South Wales, and the return on the cost of having me to do the work, it was £54 for every pound it cost. And the great bit was, it was the staff that were coming up with the ideas and the solutions and the fixes to make it better. In one of the health districts in New South Wales, it was over $8 million of cost savings and cash release. So that we can do this, but we also need to focus on where the money is best spent. If you like, in essence, or in summary, it's this: think like a patient, act like a taxpayer. The second bit is the facilities. That's the other big worry about, the facilities. And, you walk around here and you know yourself. You see the facilities. Because the one thing I do know is this: everywhere I've ever worked, and I work in Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, I've done some in the States, everywhere I've ever been, 2 things I know. One is the only thing that changes in healthcare is the accent, and everywhere is uniquely similar. But the other thing I also know is every hospital is the same. Does anyone recognize this place? It's a recently restructured organization with a new or many acting executive members. Hi, Jason. It's housed in a mismatched collection of totally unsuitable buildings which are always being redeveloped. Some of them have got rain pouring in their ceilings. It's staffed by a difficult group of dysfunctional personalities. Now you're thinking, oh my God, how does he know? And but the thing is about this is everybody's cynical about any hope for improvement. However, everybody is united about the same common grievance: about parking. It's always the parking. I was in Northern Territories in February in Darwin and Alice Springs. I went down with the chief nurse, flew down to Alice, and she got a car, and we were driving, going into Alice Springs. And then, has anyone ever been to Aussie or to Alice Springs? I see Aussie then going, no, you're allowed to put your hand up, honestly. I just saw this hand going up. Yes, please. Oh my God, nobody else put their hand up. I'll put it down again. No, don't be. Yes, I did. So we got to the hospital, and she spent about 15 minutes driving around the hospital trying to find a parking place. And eventually rang somebody and said, oh, can you give us some help? I was like, how can there not be a parking space in Alice Springs? You live in a fucking desert. Everywhere you go. So I work in a facility, though, the 3,000 square metre facility in Christchurch called the Design Lab, working with Richard Hamilton. And it is a warehouse, but what we are doing there is we mock up life-size versions of wards, of operating theatres, ICUs, paediatric areas, offices, and they're made out of cardboard, high-fidelity cardboard. And that means, of course, that they can be moved. And so I think we've done 400 designs, 400 mock-ups now over the years, partly related to quake stuff that we have to deal with. And what has happened is that the staff come through, patients come through, and they test it. And have you ever had the experience where you start somewhere and it's a new shiny building and it looks absolutely gorgeous, and by the end of the first morning everyone's going, yeah, why'd they put the sink there? That just makes no sense. Yep, you know that experience? So by testing it and mocking it up at the outset, what it has led to is much better, more functional results for patients and staff alike. Because architects should do their clever bit, but real health facilities should be designed by those who are working in them. And of the 400, and by the way, I should also mention GP practices. Because it's big enough, and because of all kinds of reasons, we were able to mock up the fire service in New Zealand. We're mocking up new rural, they're going to rebuild 21 new rural fire stations. So they mocked it up in life size, off plan, and they realized that the doors were not quite big enough to get the fire engine in. It's really expensive to retrofit this stuff. So that was one of the pluses of it. But it isn't a facilities thing. Out of 15,000 rooms in the Canterbury Health System, 12,000 were damaged. 45 out of 200 buildings had to be demolished. And starting back in 2010, right through to about 2030, there will still be building going on. But what has been developed is fantastic. So it's not money, it's not facilities. The greatest crisis we face globally is a people one. The average nurse now, in most countries in fact, is 45, 46 years of age. Within 3 years, 1/3 of the GPs in the west coast of New Zealand will be retired or retiring. There's currently, in NHS England, and it's a point that's often missed, this is not just the UK numbers, just in England alone, there's 45,000 of a shortfall of nurses. Within a few years, they believe that's heading up towards 70,000. So UK-wide, it's probably closer to about 78,000 right now. Brexit, the gift that keeps on giving. A 90% drop in the number of nurses joining the NMC register. A lot of, and many of you will know some of them, a lot of European nurses, therapists, doctors leaving or just not coming. In the United States, I think there's around 1 million shortfall of nurses already. So that is our global problem. And in Michael Oakeshott, the educational philosopher, he described education as a conversation between generations. I was in Sunderland about a couple of Fridays ago. I was 50 Band 7 nurse managers. And of the 50, at least 75% of them had 30 years or more nursing experience. And in fact, one of them retires tomorrow. So that is our great challenge, is how do we have conversations to make it better for patients, but also how do we make it better for staff as well. And this is where time comes to the party. Because when you look around, in fact, what are the access targets measured in? Like A&E targets or cancer weights or to see a psychiatrist or a physiotherapist, your referral to treatment times. All of those are time measures. Harm is frequently caused as a consequence of time ill spent. There's work and large numbers where they found that in England, if somebody waits less than 4 hours in an emergency department, their average length of stay is 4.7 days. If they wait more than 4 hours, their average length of stay is 7.2 days. And what's central is not about the number of hours, it's about ensuring that we're valuing patients' time enough that they don't go languishing on a corridor. My clinical background is in emergency care. I did my psych nursing in the west coast of Ireland, fancied some foreign travel, so I moved to England. And I did my general nurse training in the Welsh Hospital of London, also known sometimes as St Mary's Paddington. And most of my clinical career was in ED, but what we do know is, as ED folk, we're generalists, very, very good in some of the hot trauma, but when it comes to people staying for prolonged periods in the emergency departments, it leads to harm. And there's some great work undertaken by an ED doc and academic in Western Australia called Drew Richardson in 2006, and he found a 40% increase in mortality and morbidity of patients who spend a protracted time in emergency departments. And there is a mathematical formula that he produced, and I wonder whether it would be worth getting one of the departments here, so public health or epidemiology, to look at the numbers of patients who potentially come to harm or die as a consequence of protracted waits in ED. Because it might be measured ED, but the impact is felt system-wide, because the longer you wait in emergency departments, the longer you wait in hospital. Because where is the best place for somebody with neutropenia, or somebody with COPD, or somebody who's got a fractured neck of femur and it isn't lying on a corridor? At the other end, of course, is those who have got prolonged lengths of stay, such as those with a 7 or 21-day length of stay, the so-called stranded patients. And you know somebody who's stranded patients because it's kind of based around 5 things. They have multiple teams looking after them, multiple therapy teams looking after them. They got more than one medical team looking after them. They have complex comorbidities. There is no real plan, and their predictor of a long length of stay is they just have a long length of stay because no one is fully in charge, coordinating, or even making it visible, their length of stay. And we do know the longer you're in hospital, the more harm that can befall you. Do you remember what we've said for decades? Oh yeah, we'll send you into hospital, you'll be safe there. And now we're going, yeah, about that. So, waiting is not passive. Beds. Beds aren't capacity. How many beds here on this site, roughly? How many beds you got? I mean, I know it's a big building, you don't count the windows, but roughly how many? 1,000, say 1,000. And let's just pretend in walks the door with a unicorn. And we'll call him Vaughan. Some name just popped into my head. And Vaughan says, do you know what? Tomorrow morning you're going to wake up not to 1,000 beds, you will have 1,500 beds here at UHW. 1,500. And you'll have the money, you'll have the building, and you'll have all the staff. What will happen within 6 months of opening from 1,000 to 1,500 beds? What will you do? Well, you'll fill them because build it, they will come. It's true, isn't it? Now, what that means is that beds are not really capacity. Beds are often simply places where people wait for things to happen. It's a bit of furniture. And actually, the overemphasis on beds as a marker of a health system's I was going to say impotence for a moment, because it can feel like that. There's potency is actually the wrong marker entirely, because in reality, there are millions of beds. We overemphasize hospital beds. There's millions of beds in Wales. They're called people's homes. And there is no ward like home. So beds are not capacity. So who is, and it's a who, not a what, who constitutes capacity in a health system? And by the way, we're mic'd up, so do feel free to shout loud, and don't feel embarrassed about putting your hand up again. Who do you think constitutes capacity in a health system? I see your lips moving, but I can't hear you. Not patients. Patients are demand in a health system. Yes, staff, absolutely. Which type? And just to help you along, there's 3 groups of staff who constitute capacity in health. Pardon? Say it loud. Nursing, yes. And 2 more? Doctors and? Thank you. Doctors, nurses, therapists constitute capacity. What type? And don't think specialty. What type of doctors, nurses, therapists constitute capacity in the health system? Not all of them. Not all therapists, nurses, doctors. I just did that in reverse, by the way. Did you notice? See what I did there? Pardon? That is partly true, yes. Who said experience? Yes, thank you. Experienced nurses, so if you like, senior nurses, therapists, and doctors. Because when you think about it, no matter how hard a new graduate works, because what they represent is clinical decision makers and clinical action takers. You know, because no matter how hard a brand new graduate nurse works, or a new FY1, or a newly qualified therapist works, what they can rarely do is make meaningful decisions that progress the patient on their journey. You know, and we hear it manifest in language like, what are we waiting for? Registrar review. We're waiting for, how many occupational therapists in the room? Oh, loads of you, fantastic. You know, we're waiting for the occupational therapist to go and do a home assessment. We're waiting for the clinical, how many nurses in the room? Oh, my tribe. Actually, while I'm at it, how many docs in the room? Oh, fair play, brilliant. It's always good to have you here. Physios, fewer hands than normal. Who else? Social workers, pharmacists, social workers. Oh yeah, no, we're here. That's us. Yeah, no, we're just checking our own capacity. We're all good. So, who else? Speech? Podiatrist. That's awesome. A so-called vulnerable group. There's four groups, isn't there? There's podiatrists. It's not radiographers, but it's a radiography type group and others. And we need more podiatrists and the vulnerable therapies. And there's some really great work. If you look at the hashtag Make a Difference, or I Make a Difference, there's some really great work being done in that space about promoting people's awareness of podiatry. Who else do we have that I haven't mentioned? Managers? Love that. Pardon? Dietitians. Good, thank you. Anyone I forgot? Senior nurses, senior doctors, senior therapists are actually capacity. And why? Because only they can make a position to move the patient on. That is what constitutes capacity. And counterintuitively, we've never had more capacity in the health system because we've never had a more senior workforce. Let's look at, go back one, DNAs, missed appointments. People don't turn up. If somebody doesn't turn up at 8:30 for their appointment, you can't carry it into tomorrow. It's gone. It's time. Looking for equipment. Have you ever had the experience of you're running around the unit looking for a piece of, an OBS machine, and then you find two of them huddled together like survivors off the Titanic? And what have you done? You've been wasting your time. Waiting for people to call back. It's a nightmare, isn't it? You're standing by the phone, loitering with intent, and the other person is trying to get hold of you, you can't get hold of you. Something I know doesn't happen around here, I'm actually quite confident at this, is being involved in pointless meetings. Nowhere have I come, because I spent about a week here at the end of March. None at all. And something I really like that they do, actually I'm going to go off screen for a second. In the Gold Coast, which is south of Brisbane, well, something I like, and you might want to consider it here, is for a number of their standard meetings. They have your agenda, but on the meetings, I could say 10 people, and they'll say the cost of this meeting per hour at $50 an hour, average will be $500 an hour. So you think about it, if you have 4 people in a 15-minute handover, how long is your handover? 4 people in a 15-minute handover is how long? It's an hour's meeting. So when you have long meetings, it's about going around the room mentally checking. And, if it's, say, in the NHS, it's around £25 an hour, £25 an hour, sorry. And some people might think, well, I'd like to be earning that. But if you think about maternity leave, study leave, sick leave, NHS pension contributions, you can see how it just tops it up. And, we've got people who are cleaners, orderlies, they might be on the minimum wage. You've got consultants who are not. And it is a range. It is a range. And I have no idea. So if it's an average, in fact, this morning, for example, if there's, say, 50 people in the room, this meeting is running at about £1,250 an hour. So it's reframing how we think about meetings and ensuring that anyone who is there actually needs to be there. And 70% of the NHS budget, in fact 70% of health system budgets, are spent on time. How so? How can we spend most of our budget on time? Getting people together, yes, but much more than that. Tumbleweed is just crossing the room, for those who are watching in. How many of you here are part-time? Handful. How many of you are full-time? Most. What is the connecting term? Time. Because what is 70% of the NHS budget spent on? It is spent on salaries and wages, which is what? The purchase of the most precious thing we all have, our time. What I'd like you to do, if you would please now with your neighbour, and if you're looking in on screen, hello. Apparently it's been live streamed around the world as well. So I had some music on earlier, and then we realised that you know, just to make sure that license for, you know, listening to Ed Sheeran doing Galway Girl, apparently, you know. So given that Ed Sheeran used to put all his stuff out on the internet for free, but, you know, hey, there we are. But I would like you to talk with your neighbours about these three things. What are your experiences of waiting? We've all been patients, we've all been relatives of patients. What did you notice about time, and how can we better value time? And only talk about what you feel comfortable sharing. That's you know, you're in control of your story. But what have you noticed, or your experience of waiting, what did you notice, and how can we better value time, ours and also patients as well? About 4 or 5 minutes, discuss with your neighbour.
Would it be easier to just swap the things out here? Just change it out.
Sorry, I keep moving the mic.
No,
It's getting food back from one mic to another. It's sounding a bit strange.
Okay, so that's definitely full.
Yeah, that's how much battery you got on that? That's this for you.
So it's off at the moment before it's full. So it's definitely off, so before it starts, it's turned off.
What I'll do is I'll leave that in there.
So that's so they're both so it's turned on last.
Turn that one off. Oh, well done. I was literally about to do that. I might turn that one off as well. Yeah.
Okay. On. So, and I apologise for interrupting you. If we were doing the whole day, you'd have 5 hours. Because we're live streamed, we've got microphones. So, what sort of things did you discuss? What sort of things? So, and it's the reason because we're live streamed, we'll need you to put a mic. So, I heard somebody say trauma clinic. Where was that? Yes, please. Just pass the baton over, if you would. Thanks, Rebecca. There's a hospital pass if I ever saw one.
So we were talking about trauma clinic and waiting times in trauma clinic. And that actually they've got a notice up now that says, don't arrive early for your appointment because you'll just wait longer. So.
Right.
And I'd obviously arrived early because of parking, as you do, and ended up just waiting even longer. So sat there about 3 hours waiting for an appointment.
Right. I think in London, transport, if you after a certain time you get it's a less travel pass, and there's people who go through at the suburban train stations and they arrive in that bit early and then they get fined because they're called twirlies. You were here too early. Yes, please. Yes, please. Thank you.
Hi.
And actually, would it be, if you don't mind, tell us who you are, if you will, and what's your job.
My name's Lou.
Yes, you're live.
This is on, but
yes, it is. Yes, yeah.
Testing. Yeah, my name's Lou. I'm a 1 2 1 2.
This is Geraldine doing her rock goddess thing.
I'm a physiotherapist, but a patient experience, me being a patient, beginning of this year, or near the beginning of this year, I sat for 5.5 hours in an ambulance outside A&E with suspected meningitis, and then sat for 12 hours in A&E before I was outlined to an I ward without a diagnosis by that point. So what I noticed particularly about the time was the time that an ambulance was sat there not doing anything, and a qualified, very well qualified paramedic tech and a well qualified paramedic were sat there babysitting me. And when they had to go on their breaks, their allotted breaks, they drafted in another well qualified paramedic from a neighbouring waiting ambulance to come and babysit me as well. So, yeah.
And all of that time, it must have been like, what's happening? I'm really unwell. Is this?
Quite an expensive patient if you just think how much time and money that added up to.
And possibly, if I may ask, were you quite a scared one as well? Not knowing
to be honest, I was pretty out of it. So I was, if you'd said I'd been in there for half an hour, I would have said, yeah, fine. But I was very well looked after, though. Yeah. And
were your family, again, if you don't mind me asking, were your family around?
Yeah, my husband was sat there for the 5.5 hours as well. I think he found it more arduous than me, to be honest.
And there is evidence that partners of somebody who's had a heart attack, actually they've got much higher stress levels ongoing, because I've worked and did some stuff in this space, but they're at night. The husband is sound asleep, snoring away, allegedly, and they're just lying there, and they have, that period of when they're breathing, and then they don't breathe. And they're going, for God's sake, breathe, and then they snore, and they go, they're breathing, So, but it's actually it's an ongoing stressor for rallies. What else? Yes, please.
My name's Becky. I'm the Senior Nurse for Professional Standards and Quality Improvement in Cwmtaf, Morgannwg University Health Board.
See the size of her badge, it's huge.
Yeah, it's in my bag, that's why I never wear it, it's too big. So my experience is a patient experience as well. That happened a couple of weeks ago, and I had to attend an outpatient clinic to receive some significant scan results, and I get scan anxiety. That is a thing, you can look it up, so I wasn't there alone either, and to be fair, they did come out and say that the clinic was running behind time. It was running behind time by about 2 hours. But so I was sat there for 2 hours waiting to go in and see whoever I needed to see to receive whatever news I needed to receive. My friend was sat with me waiting and had taken time from work, sent them back to work because time was getting on, didn't think it'd be a problem. I actually ended up going in to see the consultant to receive my scan results on my own in the end. So what I noticed about time in particular was, you know when you go to like a restaurant and they give you like the buzzer, why can't they give you like a buzzer so you can go off and have a coffee and alleviate some of that anxiety by distracting yourself rather than being sat in a waiting room just waiting and watching the clock and the seconds tick by, and then it could buzz and then you can come back. Because I think what I noticed is I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to see somebody who's going to be able to help me and to help me get well. But so it's about their time. I appreciate that. It's about their time. I take time out of work to attend those appointments as well. And so it's about informing you and keeping you informed, because I think you're left to your own. And then what they do is they call you in and you think, great, I'm going to see somebody. And then you're sat in a room on your own for 15 minutes anyway, waiting to see somebody as well. So I think there's something about, as professionals, our time we're very busy and our time is very precious to us. But often maybe we don't stop and think about the impact of that. So with my two heads on, I guess, it's just about thinking, and it's about communication, massively about communicating what's happening.
And I'll certainly come to that latter point you've made. And you're right, what are most complaints, what are the vast majority of complaints about? Actually, it's communication. And people feeling they weren't communicated enough. And there's a number of organisations now, I've seen it for quite a long time, for about 15 years, first saw it in the States, where they would give people who are outpatients, they would give them a buzzer and say, go and get a cup of coffee. And actually a lot of the places that are, League of Friends shops that are fundraising, it was a great source of revenue, and they would often pay for it because they saw a revenue stream that would more than cover the cost. You improve the person's experience, and absolutely, Becky, as you're right, it's also a distraction, because there's few things more frustrating than waiting for Godot. Well, thank you. Anyone else? Yes, please. And again, just tell us who you are, if you would.
Hi, my name's Sarah Mortimer. I'm an occupational therapist, but I've worked a long time in manual handling. Just two phases, really, from my mum being in hospital, not here, down in the Royal Devon Exeter Hospital, actually, which was an excellent hospital. But when she was being discharged, it's really about discharge, they were pretty well organised, but we had to sit in there and wait for the tablets, for the pharmacy, for the tablets. And the equipment and things were at home, but it's also my fear factor. It's difficult. I live up here, she lives down in Devon, and the fear factor of her going home and making sure that everything's in place. And then from the other side of things, and it's a long time since I've worked solely as an OT, but I talk to a lot of OTs, it's getting all those things in place. So not only the pharmacy, the equipment, and it could be a fairly small piece of equipment that could just facilitate somebody to go home, and big piece of equipment like hoists and beds and things like that. But that's the time factor of that. And people can have, if they're maybe not ready to be totally independent at home, they have a series of 6 weeks of rehab at home. But then there's nothing after that, and it's really looking at preventing people coming in and really having maybe getting everything they need, the equipment in there, rehabbing them at home, and then really reviewing that and making, that might be that they don't need that equipment, so that can go back into the season. It might be that they do, but really having like a graded program, but also keeping an eye on those people as well, so they don't come back. Yeah.
Absolutely, no, for sure. Thank you. Yes, please, last one.
Hi, my name's Hannah. I'm a junior doctor. We were just talking about how often there are two agendas. So there's patients and relative on one side, and then staff. And my experience is that as a junior in the last few years, the ward round is very much a tick list. So it's getting through the jobs, it's doing discharge paperwork, but actually the amount of time that we get to spend with patients is not what it should be. And actually, on the job I'm in at the moment, we have time in the afternoon, and spending time with the patients, the nurses have been really surprised, which I think is a real shame, because it's obviously so unusual that the onus is on patients rather than on what we need to get done that day.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's such a crucial point. And one of the best books I read last year was, and I commend it to you all, is Adam Kay's This Is Going to Hurt, Confessions of a Junior Doctor. Very, very funny, but also really quite poignant, because one of the things it really underlines is, and you will have a PDF of all the books, it's on that list I'm going to be sending out. It's just not okay the way junior doctors are treated. And in fact, if you think about it, even the term junior doctor is quite diminishing. These are women and men in their mid-late 20s and 30s, and we're still talking about him as junior. It just doesn't feel right. And, the brutal hours, people missing weddings, parties, only people who have to organise their own sick leave. I mean, what is that about? Now, this might have been Adam Kay's experience, but he had a strong sense, and he's been doing tours, and he keeps adding to the tours he's doing. And I think he gives a 50% off for people who work in the NHS, and he's filling theatres everywhere. But it's not okay, and too often our medical colleagues, junior medical colleagues especially, or so-called junior, they will do a run, they will do their 6 months or whatever it may be, and then they leave and nobody even says thank you. Nobody even acknowledges. And they are fantastic, but we need to look after them better. We absolutely need to look after them. Because if you're a woman doctor, you have a 4-fold increase in the risk of suicide compared to other women in this country. And that can't be right. The mental health of junior doctors is significant. And we talk about resilience, is how do we build, not just for medical colleagues, but for others as well. We keep talking about resilience. How do we help people become more resilient? Well, why not ask the people to become more resilient? Why not create a system where people don't need to have that level of stress, where they're having to build a personal resilience? It's about the system, not just about the individuals, and it's about doing both things. And next week, I'll be speaking at 400 health finance managers in Birmingham. And we're going to be talking, the theme is resilience, and I'll be making that point because actually the job of a finance person is as much about safety, patient safety, as a doctor, a nurse, or a therapist. Because their job is they are stewards of the public purse. And in 2011, there was a major scandal, pay scandal in Queensland, where what happened was they introduced a software and it collapsed. It was absolutely shockingly poor because I was over there doing some stuff at the time. So what was happening is people weren't getting paid, or they were getting paid twice as much as they were entitled to. This is clearly very distracting. ID make. Should we all just stop and watch what Jason's doing? Because
sorry, the conversation ID.
Good to know. Thank you, because we weren't distracted by any of that. None. And he says it's all about me. I mean, really.
I did say to start fighting.
He's a good man. I really like this man. So yeah, that was, so people weren't getting paid. Their pay was coming in late, or they were getting more. They were getting twice, double pay. So there's some issues around that. But if you think about it, if you are a nurse who's gone to work and you've just received a call from the bank to say we're going to foreclose your mortgage, and we're going to cancel all your direct debits because that's 2 months in a row you've not been paid, and you have no money and you've gone past your overdraft. When you're going towards a patient with a venflon, so the job of everyone who works in healthcare is patient safety. If you're doing coding, you need to do your job well, so we know how well what the Cardiff and Vale population's health is. We can capture that. No matter where we work in healthcare, our real role is about patient safety. And the checklist, so we release time to care, so junior doctors don't have to think about all the tick boxes, but have time to think about the patients. And that applies to anyone who's a clinician. And by the way, this notion of frontline, when you unpick that term, it itself is quite patronizing. Because there's this notion of frontline, and politicians love doing this, don't they? The notion that the frontline are more important, more special, more everything, that infers that the back line doesn't count at all. And you try and run a health system without the guys who are the maintenance people on making sure that the heating is working. Or the people who are the finance people, again, who are making sure you do get paid. Or the admin, who means that they're not, the doctor isn't running around chasing paperwork. Or the people who work in medical records, getting the right notes in the right place in the right time. Everyone has a contribution to make. And I knew that when there was the earthquakes in Christchurch, there was no front line, there was no back line, there was just everyone. Because there was no them, there's only us. Forgive me? We're all a cog in a machine, but you know what? You try and run even the finest Swiss watch without one of the cogs, and none of it works. So we all play it, and you're absolutely right, we play an important part, because your time is your most important currency, So use it well, value it preciously, and spend it wisely. But you know, time is different things in different places, and time has a different pace. How many of you have had the experience of you get to 11:30 and think, oh my God, look at that, it's 11:30, there's not even a child in the house washed yet, you know? And you're running around, but when you're working on a ward, the time just flies, doesn't it? It absolutely flies by, but if you're in a hospital bed, time comes dripping slow. And what is the predominant emotion of people in hospital? Patients, I should say, in hospital, not people. What is the predominant emotion, most common emotion? Not anxiety, not so much, certainly not after admission. Boredom. Really boring. There's an academic called Lizzie Burns, Dr. Lizzie Burns, and she has written a number of papers in the BMJ, and you can find it in BMJ Open, which is about boredom. And I think it was in the 1940s or early 1950s, the Canadian Defence Force did a lovely study. It was actually it's all called the pathology of boredom. And what they did is, with volunteers, is they put them in a sensorily deprived environment, put on blindfolds and block their ears and stuff like that. And after 15 minutes, 1/3 of the men and 1/4 of the women would rather have been electrocuted than stayed bored. I don't know what that says about men's tolerance for things, but boredom, and we know about ICU psychosis. You know, the lack of the sensory deprivation that leads to that psychosis. So boredom, because when you think about it, you're lying in a bed, not talking to anyone, and it's really, really dull. But the other side of it, and it's been mentioned indirectly earlier, is about waiting if you have a life-limiting condition. Because somebody with a life-limiting condition, their time is extra precious. Because every moment becomes precious. Because waiting 1 minute feels like 10. Waiting 10 minutes feels like half an hour. And waiting half an hour feels like an eternity. And some of you described some of the processes. And a few weeks before my dad died in 2004, we were waiting in outpatients for an hour and a half. And then he saw the oncologist, who said, we'll get you a chest x-ray. And then he waited another best part of an hour to have his chest x-ray, and then another hour or so for somebody who was pretty much at the back end of life, heading towards cachexia. And that wasn't okay, was it? And is it about bad people? Heck no. We have health systems that are full of good people working in systems that don't work well or value people's time. And time really is the precious currency. So I want to show you, and I don't know if we can turn the lights at the front end. In fact, I should have asked for the lights at the front too. Do you mind having a play with the lights at the light panel? Because what I want to show you now is an 80-second clip. And what it'll do, it's going to talk about time. This is me playing for time, by the way, right now. And it's just the top lights of this screen, if you would, please. And this is called Your Last 1,000 Days. And if you will, have a look at this.
The day's almost over, the sky's about to show her the first glimpse of gold over waking up dreams. And thing is, I don't know why things that I felt so concerned with just let go. Drift with the breeze. I've been running around looking for answers, and all of these days there still ain't enough. Like the moonlit late plains, let the questions just hang. All I need is time with your love. I've been running around looking for answers, and all of these days there still ain't enough. There ain't enough. Time with you, love. There ain't enough.
So, if you just keep the lights there. Can we turn off the fronts as well? Just these ones, is that possible? Or just down a little bit, that's a bit better, I think, isn't it? So, what did you notice? Actually, tell you what, just about a minute or two, and I'm conscious we are live streaming, so if you're with a group, please do the same thing. Just for a minute or two, what struck you about what you just saw? What did you notice in this little clip? lasting 80 seconds, called The Last 1,000 Days. Discuss. Okay. So what did you notice? What was striking about what you've just seen? So just if you will.
It didn't matter what age you were, it was old and young people.
Yep. And just tell us again who you are. So
I'm Charlotte and I am a dialysis support worker. Thank you.
So it didn't matter what age. I think it's about 75% of people who are over 75 that you die beyond that. But that means about 25% don't make it to that age. And some don't make it to the first 1,000 days. Thankfully, few now. If you were, the average woman in the year 1800 gave birth to 6 children on average. Some of you are wincing at that. But only 2 of them lived long enough to become become parents, which is why the population of the earth didn't actually grow for a long, long time, because 2 out of your 3 children would never live long enough to become parents themselves. And 40% of children under children under the age of 5 died by the time they were 5. So death was prevalent and common. And Dr. Catherine Mannix, I think it's called "We Need to Talk About Death" or something like that. Fabulous, fabulous book, because between 1900 and the year 2000, we lost the understanding of what death is like in the sense of its public nature. You know, people would die at home. They would be left out on the kitchen table. Now, we've privatized and industrialized deaths to a point that for many clinical staff, they may even get much of their clinical training without seeing a dead body, much less before they come into healthcare. So it's not just about 8 years. Thank you. What else? Yes, please. And again, if you will, tell us who you are.
Hi, I'm Helen. I'm a community liver alcohol specialist. For me, that was about enjoying every moment, and not being in a hospital bed, and just doing things you enjoy, and that your time is precious, and that if you are unwell, then being in that hospital bed at the end was quite poignant, really. That it was very unhappy, whereas all the other people portrayed were doing things that they enjoyed. Yeah. And I think it's about finding what your patient enjoys doing and trying to help them to achieve that, even when they are in hospital, when they're bored, just trying to stimulation, isn't it? You know, trying to make people happy.
And this wasn't a film about being in hospital. This was a film of life. And for most of us, please God, our lives will be that big, but the hospital bit is that. And you're right, because, you know, enjoying the moment is there's people who got up this morning who won't see this evening. And for none of us have a guarantee of a tomorrow. Not the one. So, living right now. Absolutely. Who else? Yes, please. Why are you shocked that there's a microphone coming your way when everyone's been passing a microphone all morning? It's like, oh, this, what, me too?
It wasn't passed to anybody else. For me, it's always that you're not born with an expiry date.
You're not born with an expiry date.
And you should make every moment count, really, if you can,
you.
even though we're always faced with challenges. And for me, the numbers on there, if we all knew when our expiry date was, maybe we'd make every moment count better.
Absolutely. And tell us who you are, if you will, please.
Oh, sorry, I'm a ward sister on gynaecology here in Cardiff and Vale.
I love your privacy notions. Yeah, I'm going to tell you this much. I work. I'm not going to tell you my name. That's but you're right. You're absolutely right. There's valuing that time. Anybody else? Yes, please. Then one more.
My name's Mac. I'm a physio from Cardiff, and I'm working in quality improvement at the moment. When I saw that, I actually just wanted to go and see my mum. That's how it made me feel.
Nice. I have to tell you, I've lost both of my parents, and I would give away many of my tomorrows to spend another day with either of them.
Hi, my name's Gail. I'm a healthcare support worker on B5. I just found that I was focusing a lot on the numbers and not actually on the people. So it just shows you watch the numbers, you forget about everything soon, you're just focusing on one thing, and I kept looking at the time and the numbers and not
And as a
people.
counterpoint to the point that was made earlier by Ward Sister of the Ward, we don't know, which is actually how many of us would want to know how many days. I don't think I personally would, but for those who are life-limiting illness, they may not have an exactitude, but what they would know is it won't be very long. And this film was created by my son, Will Dolan, Firewood Pictures, with his best business partner, best friend, Asher. And what I asked him to do 2 years ago now was to tell a story of 1,000 days, last 1,000 days. And you can see it's a narrative arc through history, and you see it's all filmed in Stratford-on-Avon. And you got the couple, new baby, lots and lots of years ahead. Then it goes on, you see the couple, and each of these little vignettes, you know, you can put your own story, you can plant your own thought about what it could represent to you. Couple running through the park, a young fellow, 5-year-old running through the park, and mum and dad are there, and you know she's got a youngster in arms, and the husband or partner tenderly leans over and gives her a kiss on the forehead, but what none of them know is she only has 1,000 days left. Or the three kids, you see the three teenagers, you know, watching Liverpool beat Spurs or whatever it might have been. Wales beat Ireland in the rugby game. Could I just say congratulations on the slam? You deserved it. You absolutely deserved it. How cool would it be if it was Wales and Ireland in the final in Japan? But, you know, everything was fantastic. And this film is quietly dedicated to my best friend, Mark Mendell. Because Mark died on the 26th of February, 2017. And you remember when we were teenagers, we were completely bulletproof, weren't we? You know, life went on, you know, and Mark had been to his GP a number of times, complaining of abdo pain. And eventually he walked in with acute abdo pain into University College Hospital in June 2014. And by the time he was transferred back to Swindon, where he lived, they had removed his descending colon, where the primary was found, but he also had cancer in his liver, his omentum, his mesentery, and his lung. So Mark was terminal from the get-go. And the question with Mark, how many of you had the experience, by the way, of you're the health professional, so you're the go-to person in your family, and you're it. And you have people showing you bits of your anatomy that you'd really rather not, you know. For God's sakes, we're at a party, would you leave it out? But we've all lived that life, haven't we? And, you know, when I talked to Mark, it was never what's the matter with you, because we knew that. The question with Mark always, when we spoke, was what matters to you and who matters to you. And the what and the who for him was that he could see his 3 young daughters growing to be as big as they could be. And they're now 20, 14, and 15. And he had about 1,000 days. We weren't to know it, but you know, he died about 1,000 days later. And we miss him. I was talking to my other best friend last night, and there's a Mark-sized hole in our lives. And you see the next film, you've got the woman sitting in the car. What do you think, you know, and you can shout it out, what do you think was going on in her head maybe when you looked at that? What did you think she might be thinking? Suicide. Maybe she's under the care of the psychiatric team. Or somebody once beautifully described it when referred in an emergency department, they said to the patient, you're going to see a psychiatrist. They said, what's that? It's a doctor for feelings, which I really quite liked. But maybe she is, and she's under the care of the team. She'll get through this period. But what she doesn't know, in fact nobody knows, is in 1,000 days she'll take her own life. Or maybe she's just been at outpatients here, and she spent hours, and they've said, do you know what? We thought we had it, but it looks like that lump is back. She's processing a conversation she's going to have to go back to her family. And then you see the couple dancing. It was all filmed outside the RSC, Royal Shakespeare Company. And you see them, and you know, that's Asher's then, his dad and his then brand new stepmom, and dancing away. And then you see in the last scene, filmed at Nottingham University Hospital, where you've got a young nurse, many thousands of days, and goes around the bed, and the woman in the bed, the clock ticks down to 1,000. And here's a question for you all to answer out loud, and it's this. How many of your last 1,000 days would you choose to spend in hospital? What would that number be? Absolutely none. None at all. And I was doing a talk about this in Oxford about 6-8 months ago now, and a group, and an occupational therapist said 3. And we kind of said, oh, why 3? She says, well, you know, I'll give them 3 days. I would prefer they, you know, sort out my medication. I prefer 2. 1 would be better, but 3 is the max. And we just loved her specificity. But I think, you know, too often we have end-of-life conversations at the very back end of life. We have those end-of-life conversations far too late. And I think if we had more conversations with the public about along the lines of, you know, what we know of this condition, most people get 3 years, maybe 5 years with these complex comorbidities. So how many of the next 3 years would you like to spend in hospital? And what do you think they would be saying? The same as us. Because it feels to me we put too much emphasis on building cathedrals of techno-cure, which are hospitals. And maybe much more the emphasis should be on how do we enable people to be in the place they want to be, which is their home. And what we do to people, not with malice, but with kindness, is we kill them. And a great friend and geriatrician colleague of mine is Dr. Ian Sturgis, and he talks about deconditioning as a harm event that affects on a scale of 10 to 100 times greater problem than falls and pressure sores. And Derek Laidler, who's a senior physiotherapist in NHS Highland, has gifted these lovely next 2 or 3 slides. And I want to talk to you about them. Because when it comes to deconditioning, we will offer you, in the NHS, a very special offer. If you're 80 and you spend 1 week in a hospital bed, this is what we'll do for you. We'll take 20% off your quads power, you're going to lose 1.5 kilos of muscle mass, and you'll lose 10% of your aerobic capacity. How good are we? How good is that? You know, go us. But the thing is, if you spend 12 hours in an emergency department, you'll lose 1 to 2% of your aerobic capacity. 1 to 2% is the ability to pick up a cup of tea. And we worry about hydration. And we're not done yet, because deconditioning is associated, or hospital inactivity is associated, with a 48% increase in disability. An equal percentage increase in the need for help with activities of daily living a month after discharge. Muscle weakness 3 to 5 years after discharge. And if you go into hospital and you spend a week in a hospital bed, you have a 5-fold increase in the risk of institutional care. Because deconditioning is the difference between going home and going to a home. And we're not done yet. You know, it's because it's jumping forward. These slides are jumping forward a bit. But you know, you look at it in terms of accelerated bone loss. You know, the demineralization of bone, malnutrition. You could have Gordon Ramsay at the bottom of your bed swearing at you saying, eat my food. And you'd be saying, yeah, but the thing is, Gordon, I'm not hungry. Because if you're not up and burning calories, you're not going to be hungry, so you get malnourished. And we also know if you've had surgery, you need a higher protein load for wound healing. And I do wonder indirectly how many wounds are an indirect consequence of deconditioning due to hospital inactivity. Delirium. The word comes from Latin delira, meaning out of the furrow, because people's minds go out of the furrow of normality and integrity into a randomness. And 30% of medical patients present with delirium, which is a serious, sudden onset of cognitive physical decline. Sensory deprivation, we talked about boredom earlier, and incontinence. 50% of people over the age of 65 will wet themselves or be incontinent within 24 hours of arrival. Now, supposing, just think about it for yourself for a second. Could you imagine any of us being stuck in a hospital bed and suddenly wetting ourselves or not making it to the toilet. And the mortification it would lead to. And what too often happens is people then end up in incontinence products. And then they go home in those incontinence products. And they end up leading a smaller life because they don't go to the British Legion, they don't go to Tesco's or Aldi, they don't go to the pub because they're afraid that, you know, it happens once, it might happen again. And their lives just get that little bit smaller. And because they're not mobilizing, they become more and more frail. Because it's about the harm event that is deconditioning that occurs every single day. And ownership is, once you get that, how do you encourage others to own it? And it's around this. It's about responsibility, stepping up, owning the cause, owning the problem, and also taking responsibility for the success of it. And that's very empowering and powerful when you start thinking, I can do something about this. Because what this is really about, if you like, this morning, is really about how do we create 1,000 stories of change? Not one big one, but 1,000 little ones. And NPJ Paralysis actually started in the outback of New South Wales. I've always loved this, New South Wales. And I was in Broken Hill. And some great colleagues from Emergency Care Intensive Support Team, Tim Gillett, Pete Gordon, and Anne-Marie Riley, the Deputy Chief Nurse at Nottingham University. We've been swapping notes. And I responded, I can't actually remember what they had written, but what I do know is I responded, nursing was born in the church and raised in the army, and putting people in a uniform, pajamas as their uniform, let's fix that, which within just a few days turned into end PJ paralysis. Because people come into hospital, they get in their pajamas, and then they're paralyzed in their pajamas till the day they leave. So let's end it. And it was kind of born indirectly as a result of a conversation with a subacute rehab unit nurse manager. And she said what was going on is you had these men and women in their, you know, PJs and stuff like that, and a physiotherapy assistant. Any physiotherapy assistants in here? Where's the physios again? There you are. The physio system was going, and he said he would bring the shoes to the gym in the morning. And he said to this nurse manager, would it be okay if I just put the patient's shoes on them rather than just carrying them to the gym and putting them on in the gym? I know, it's apparently bleeding obvious, isn't it? So the patients will put them on and think, well, geez, if I've got my shoes on, I may as well get a go the whole way. And what that then led to is a bit of a change in the model of care, because the physios would walk behind the patient and assess things like gait. The occupational therapists, instead of going to a kitchen, which is kind of a mock-up one in the hospital, they would go to the coffee shops and assess things like cognitive function and capability around managing change and stuff like that. They would go on the bus to somebody's home rather than putting them in the car in the pajamas. What it led to, because there was better mobilization, she said the tipping point we know is not only were all the patients up and dressed. The men said one day, do you think we could do a barbecue? And she says, what decent Australian man would ever have a barbecue in his PJs? But they also reduced their length of stay by a day. So it kind of built from that place. But the thing is, we have known about deconditioning since before the birth of the NHS, founded by one of Wales' most famous and greatest sons, Aneurin Bevan. And Dr. Richard Asher, Jane Asher's father, as by the by, the actress, he was a London physician, and he wrote one of the most influential papers of the 20th century called The Dangers of Going to Bed. And he talked about, it is always assumed that the first thing in any illness is to put the patient to bed. Hospital accommodation is numbered in bed. Illness is measured by the length of time in bed. Doctors are assessed by their bedside manner. You can tell I've read this a number of times, not even looking. Bed is not ordered like as a pill or a purge, but it is assumed as the basis for all treatment. And then he goes on to say, yet we should think twice before ordering our patients to bed, because underneath the comforts of the blankets lie formidable dangers. And while he didn't talk about deconditioning, he identified every single body system that was impacted. Skin integrity being compromised because of pressure sores. The only part of our body physiologically designed to withstand sustained pressure are the soles of our feet. Peristalsis slows down because people are immobile, and because peristalsis slows down, they're more likely to get constipation. They're more likely to get dry, to get dehydrated because they're not drinking enough. Blood volume reduces, resting heart rate increases. 4.1%, oh, and the other one's lethargy. He talked about lethargy, because people are just, you get bored of being bored. And just lying in a bed. Now, the thing is, we've all had that experience where we're not very well, we're feeling a bit crook, and we're in bed, or rather we're out lounging around watching daytime telly. That's why men die early. There's only so much Oprah Winfrey we could handle when we retire. But lying there, and your friend rings you, and they say, I hear you're not very well. I'll be over in half an hour. Well, you're in that shower so fast. And we get ourselves dressed, and then suddenly we think, do you know what, I'm glad I got dressed because I feel miserable. Now I'm better for it. It's true, isn't it? But he talked about all of these bits, and he found that while we didn't talk about deconditioning, that is what was happening. And 4.1%, 1 in 25 of all fractured necks of femur occur to people who are in hospital settings. And they occur at the end of their length of stay, predominantly. And you can just see, there's demineralization of bone, there's loss of blood volume, there's increasing heart rate, more shallow breathing, and they get up because they're told, oh, we'll let you home today, and they get all excited and they go to the toilet, and before you know, they've hit the floor and they've already taken the head off the acid tablet before they're grounded. And I passionately believe we could halve the falls rates leading to harm if we got people up, dressed and moving. Absolutely could. But what do? We say, oh yeah, but that's dangerous, letting them out, mobilizing. I mean, really, they could come to harm. It really, it's just, seriously, it's a problem. And I tell you a 4-letter word that is the most dangerous word in healthcare: safe. Chris Tuckett, by the way, is a fantastic physiotherapist at Health Physio, if you look him up. But we are so preoccupied by safety. Whose safe is it? Because above all else, this is a cultural issue, and we don't feel they are safe to go home because what we're doing is imposing our lovely middle-class values on people without asking them what they think. And Tricia Elliott is a fantastic physician in Scotland, and she talks about going to patients and saying to them, would you be disappointed if at the end of this ward round I was to say, we'll see how you are tomorrow, or would you have preferred to have been able to go home? And she says, if they say, we'd rather go home, she says, that gives me a really good insight into their appetite for risk. Because it's the patients and their family's appetite. And just because somebody lives in a cold, dark house, why shouldn't they go back to their cold, dark house? That is a choice that may be made for them, that we then impose our values. Or then we say, oh yeah, but they haven't got capacity. Capacity wielded like a stick to conform patients to our definition of what safe is. And phrases like no rehab potential being banned from the lexicon, because everyone has rehab potential. But when people believe what you believe, when you start telling your stories and you engage with people, and any social movement, and NPJ Paralysis has become one with about 600 million impressions on Twitter. It's now global. It's in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, United States, Ireland, here. I have to say, in the 70-day campaign, Wales per head of population by far was the best in terms of results. But all social movements have got 3 things in common. 1, it's actionable. Black Lives Matter is actionable. Me Too is actionable. End PJ Paralysis is actionable. It's connected. It enables people to say, actually, this is something that speaks to me. And it's extensible. And what that means is people will do your mission on their terms. I love, for example, in France, I can't remember the French is like Baissez la pont. In France, Me Too has transmuted into Kiss the Pig. I just quite like that. In North America, they talk about, rather than NPJ Plus, they talk about Everybody Moves. Amit Arora, a fabulous great friend and geriatrician, he talks about get up, get dressed, get moving. Which about 83 characters on Twitter. In Holland, they talk about end bed centricity. What does matter is not the term you use, it's about people buying into it, and because it's the right thing to. I don't get precious about it. And what I do know is this: I don't own End PJ Paralysis. And I don't own Last 1,000 Days. And because I don't own them, it means we all own them. And nobody needs my permission to do stuff. And that's really important. So Courtney Baines, he actually finished in Cambridge on Friday. He created, off his own bat, these Lego characters. And what you see here is you've got a woman who's very unhappy in her bed, and then she's wandering around the ward doing New York, New York. And what was really lovely about Courtney is he very generously, people would say, I love your poster, can we use it in our hospital? And he'd get back in touch, of course you can, send me the logo of where you work, and we'll put your logo acknowledging what he's done. And this has gone around 400 organizations around the world. And I was in the wonderfully named, I was doing some work there, the wonderfully named Wagga Wagga. And Murrumbidgee Local Health District has got that poster up there as well. This is a picture of cognitive shift. Because if you see somebody dressed in pajamas, you think they're unwell. You see them dressed in clothing, suddenly the shift goes to, actually they're getting better. Actually, one thing I could ask is, could the heating, because I know people are going to start setting fires to the seats in a minute, could we get the heating turned up somewhere, if that's okay? It's only because I'm worried about your, your furniture. And you see that, you can see it with families, can't you? You have families who say, geez, ma'am, you look brilliant today. Yesterday you looked terribly. Now look at you, you're looking better. And you've got the medical colleagues coming in saying, how do you feel? And we did pick up from the 70-day campaign some soft intel that more registrars were discharging patients on a Saturday, because it's pretty hard to say to somebody, we'll see you how you are in the ward round on Monday, when you've got somebody dressed like that. And what do you think the patient is thinking? I am ready to go. And a good friend, Michelle Casey, is a nurse educator in Christchurch. She talks about how what woman would want to be seen in a hospital bed in pajamas or a gown when she's not even wearing her lipstick or a bra. And there is a really important dignity issue there, I think, as well, isn't there? The physios and OTs at the Royal Free been producing leaflets about encouraging people to get up and mobilizing. Because when you think about it, like I said earlier, we've said to people for 70 years, come to hospital, you're safe. But we also said to people, take your clothes home, because honestly there's no room for them. And what we're in the process of doing now is we're having a global conversation to redo what we did. We're now saying to patients, come and bring your clothes in. We're asking them to change what we've embedded as 30 or 40 or 50 years of practice. So that's why we need effectively to give people permission, because you might be a lawyer in one life, but you come into hospital, you're a compendium of disease. And you lose your agency, you lose yourself, what's the phrase I'm looking for? It's like self-direction. You're constantly becoming a patient who does what they are told. And we're really needing to re-give people permission to do this. And in Edinburgh last week, one of the senior consultant physicians said, I will ask all my patients to bring their clothes in. And I will ask them to get dressed every morning. And there's a room about his size. And I said, years ago, nurses and therapists might get a bit grumpy, because the reality is patients are more likely to do stuff if a doctor tells them. Isn't that true? They will. And there was a time we used to get grumpy about that. And actually, you know what? We need to build a bridge and pretend like we're like Elsa. Let it go, let it go. And it's fantastic when our medical colleagues are engaged. And it's about leveraging, because this is not about doctors or nurses or therapists or managers. It's about all of us. And it's not about clinicians. It is about the orderly. It is about the cleaner. It is about the ward clerk. If you think about it, there are some people in this hospital who will have a closer, more level relationship with the person who's the cleaner than they will with the nurse or doctor. Because there's a nurse on every street. There's not a doctor on every street. For most people, their social media will be the only time they connect with a doctor is in professional terms, not on personal terms. Doctors are, if you like, the secular priests in a modern age. They are other. So if a doctor says, want you to do this, it is taken more seriously. But the person they might know best is the person who lives next door is a cleaner. They get that. See, we embrace this for everyone, because they're all part of this stuff. Linda and I wrote a book, or a booklet, which we're going to write up as a book. It'll only be about 40,000 words. We'll do that sometime this year. And this is one of my heroines even. This is Chloe Harris. And Chloe, 2 years ago, was a new graduate physiotherapist. And her grandfather was coming to hospital, first time in his life had come to hospital, and he would get dressed every morning. And the nurses, out of kindness, say, you don't need to be in your pajamas. You can get dressed. You can stay in your pajamas. He said, I've always got dressed. And when he was discharged, she said, you know what? For my grandpa, that was, that was just not what he was used to. So what must it be like to be in a hospital in your pajamas or a gown? So she encouraged her colleagues to come to work or get dressed in pajamas. Chloe started all this. You can blame her, or we could actually, I think, thank her. Because you can see this photograph here. You have a few patients. There's Chloe. This person here, that's a 50-year-old staff nurse. I know what you're thinking. Because pajamas age us, don't they, in hospitals? They do, they really do age us. And what she did, she put out on Twitter, and it started everyone doing. You can see here, you got the physios, patient front and center. After decades of looking, we finally found Wally. That's really good news. It's really great. Western Health in Sydney, so lots and lots of places doing. And this is Aileen Horgan. And Aileen was a nurse manager in Cork University Hospital and Rehab Ward. And she had 2 patients, and both of them were, both had dementia. Both of them waiting to go to care homes. Their physical and cognitive function improved so much once they got up, dressed and moving, that instead of going to a care home, they went back to their home. And I wonder if a couple of patients a day from here, just 1 or 2, what impact that might have across your whole system, because it's a real thing. And you can see my local hospital is Warwick Hospital. You can see where they've would have over 1,800 Zimmer frames, 544 walking sticks, over 1,400 crutches. But because, and this was over a couple of months when we did the campaign, patients staying in hospital for 7 days or longer reduced from 218 to 184. That's about 2 wards worth. That is the difference of people not lying on corridors. My local hospital has hit 95% plus every month for well over a year now. Because it means that people are not lying in corridors, and when you're not lying on a corridor in an ED, or you're not lying in the back of an ambulance, you're going to spend less time in a hospital. So it becomes a virtuous circle. If you're a doctor, you're not going to be doing safari ward rounds. If you're a therapist, your patients are in the cohort where they should be, same as for a nurse. So you're mobilizing to make that impact. And Pete Gordon, who's now a very good friend, he created these Safer Home First NPJ Paralysis badges. They became so popular, they're worth about half a kidney now on the black market, if you want to buy one. Rosie Chilvers in Portsmouth, where I'm next week after. She's on this, and I love this. This is a medical oncology ward, and these are placemats on the trays for patients getting something to eat. Because what you're doing is subliminally saying to people, we really want you to get up and dress. And we know for patients, even with advanced cancer, mobilization prolongs life. It kind of makes sense, doesn't it? But it's about that sort of stuff. So we could do this. Oh, by the way, I've got a Facebook page called NPJ Paralysis. If you join it, you can download a load of this kind of content. Sonia Noshin, soniasparkles.com is our website. We just commissioned her to update the program, so people pledging support. And we just updated the poster as well. I love the fact that she makes me 12 years old. I love her so much. But this is a message. This is messaging to amplify the messages of it. And a couple of years ago, in fact, July the 4th, 2016, I think, or 17 last year, a couple of years ago, this is Dee Fowler. She was then the chief nurse at Shrewsbury and Telford. That is the CEO, by the way. Can't wait to see Len Richards in this little natty number. And I saw I said, oh, Dee, I love this. I sent her a tweet. This is a fantastic. This Wake Up Happy could become the anthem of End PJ Paralysis. It is magical. And I put a tweet out that says, has anyone got any other ideas of songs for End PJ Paralysis? And within a few days, Michelle Smith had created a Spotify playlist. You've got to move it, move it. Do you know, you can't say that phrase without going into that song tone, can you? You've got to move it, move it. Get up with that thing, get up, stand up, take me out. We don't have to take our clothes off, unless it's consensual in a whole different conversation. Walk this way. And somebody said a line, Tim Gillett said a line from Bohemian Rhapsody, and I really, really quite like that. So I decided one night to rewrite all the words of Bohemian Rhapsody to the PJ Paralysis theme. Is this the real life or PJ fantasy? Caught in a pat slide, no escape from reality. It goes on, Mama just killed a man, put some PJs on his bed, made him wear him, now he's dead. You know, if I didn't mean to make you cry, if I'm not back from M&S by tomorrow, carry on, because day clothes really matter. And a few months later, I was in mid-Cheshire doing a talk, a bit like this, and these awesome women did a flash mob that I did, the Dolan sisters. And, you know, just people of a certain age will know the cultural reference point for that one, the Irish singers. And, you know, it's just, what they might have lacked in vocal prowess, they did not lack in enthusiasm. And by the end of it, everyone was up on their feet, clapping and cheering. But you know, it's such a beautiful song, isn't it? And you know, at the end, as it kind of comes down, you got a piano piece with Freddie Mercury in the end. And I rewrote it as, PJ paralysis matters, anyone can see. Patient time, it matters. It really, really matters to me. Because that's really what it comes down to. NPJ paralysis is a vehicle for valuing patients' time. Because while our time is busy and important, our patients' time is sacred. But you know, I didn't wake up one morning thinking, Jesus, I really fancy starting a global social movement, just for the crack. You know, the Irish variety. It doesn't actually work like that. But if you're going to do something, well, you know, you might as well go in boots and all and really, really go for it. International Nurses Day last year in the wonderful Wagga Wagga. If you want to get to Wagga Wagga from the airport, you have to drive through Gumley. I just love their names. But this is the regional chief nurse. Actually, Jason, this would be your now equivalent, or you or Ruth, you know. That is the fabulous Karen's teddy bear. And their regional education lead, Rebecca. And I just done a television interview, and like this. My parole officer wasn't sure if they were pleased or appalled. But, you know, the thing is, where did the joy go? Does anyone remember doing wheelchair races? Or when staff would leave, you'd put them in a bath. That is, for anyone listening in, that is guilty laughter, just, you know. Or, yeah, and of course you put betadine or charcoal in the bath, you know. And if you came to work on your last day without spare clothes, you were going home wet, and this was on you, you know. And, or grabbing, what do I call the thing, a drip stand, and putting your foot, and then wheeling as far as you could go, putting a mark on the wall and just having do you remember doing those some things? You know, I know I was a child, my mother told me to keep away from, but we were having great fun, weren't we? We were having a lot of fun, and when patients see staff having fun, actually they enjoy it too, because happy staff give great care. It's as simple as that. And the thing is, it's not your director of allied health, it's not your acting chief nurse, it's not your medical director who's incoming, it's not Len as CEO, it's not they that stop us. Actually, the ones who stop us most are ourselves, because we think we'll get into trouble. We think that it's a health and safety issue, but actually, you know what? It's a culture issue. And I've been talking to a chief exec in Australia the other night, and she has called out, she's just new, she's nursing background, and she called out her staff in this very big organization, as big as this place. And she says, you know, I've been here for a couple of months, and you know what? You don't smile at each other. You don't acknowledge each other on the corridor. You don't talk to each other when you see each other. You don't, you know, you leave a person who's struggling with their wheelchair and you walk past, and you know what? That's not okay. And sometimes we have to call out the things that are in plain sight and call it as it is. And Google did a fantastic piece of work where they spent years studying why did some Google teams, why were they so much more successful than the others? They spent millions. They looked all around the world, brought in psychologists and anthropologists. You know what they found? The determinant of the biggest successful teams were kindness. How kind they were to each other. That was it. You kind of think, Jesus, I could have told you that, but no, this is what they found. And trust is the lubricant of organizations. Because a team without trust is not a team at all. Trust is the absolute alpha and omega of a team, and particularly when it's kind to each other. And I've listened to U2 all my life, and I remember the manager once saying, if you watch U2, and they've been going, 40 years now, and you look at the Stones, the Who, the Clash, the Beatles, all of them had fallouts. He says, what kept U2 on the road is you watch how they speak to each other. They speak with respect, with kindness, they hold each other to account, but they fundamentally are still 4 lads from the north side of Dublin who really like each other. And incivility costs lives. And there's an ED doc, he was in mid-staffs, and Chris Turner is his name, and he talks about incivility, and there's a good Harvard Business Review paper about this as well. Not his, though. And if you think 12% of people who leave, they leave because of their manager. They don't leave their job, they leave their manager. 2/3 of people where incivility occurs, they will avoid the person as a result. And when you're trying to enable people to go home and you've had a really rough time with somebody just beforehand, you're going to be much likely to engage with them. So incivility has consequences. But kindness is infectious. If you keep smiling as you're going down the corridor, not only will people wonder what you've been up to, our mirror neurons are wired to smile back. I've been smiling at people all morning. I know you're here somewhere, I saw you. But this morning I was grabbing a cup, there you are. I was grabbing a cup of coffee and I smiled at you. You kind of thought, oh my God, I've got a stalker, there's no charge. But there's a warmth about you. We haven't even met yet. And it does, that's how we make a culture change. Because first people change, and then cultures change, and organizations change, and they change in that order. And when people believe what you believe, when they own what you do, and they want to be part of it, they will make massive things happen. And in a 70-day campaign, we had 710,000 patients mobilized, 703,000 of them were dressed. This, in many ways, is the more interesting number because this reflects a change of culture, that it became more normative for people to get dressed. And that's what matters. And visiting your ward in the I was going to call it the kidney ward, the nephro unit, is brilliant care, brilliant service, brilliant connections of people who like each other. The interactions between the ward clerk and the doctors, just like the nurses and the therapists, that's the place you want your loved ones to be. And why wouldn't it be like that everywhere? And the goal might have been 1 million, as Jason said earlier. We may not have hit the target, but we surely did not miss the point. And that's what's important too. But what did it mean? Well, here's some data from across England. We didn't have any Welsh data that we could get, but a dramatic reduction in people stranded in the hospital for more than 21 days. A reduction in people waiting 7 days or more in hospital, an even bigger one. And correlation is not causation, but we know that this was not seasonal variation, that something else went on. Beds occupied. I know that you've got people hanging out in the back of ambulances, means that every bed is occupied. You can't even get in the door of the emergency department. You have fewer beds occupied, you've got more places for them to go. People spending less time waiting for care in emergency departments, less time waiting for treatment. The Northern Care Alliance, which is Bury, Salford, Rochdale, North Manchester and Salford hospitals, 2,000 bedded system, they had 6% of all the numbers collected. We did it off the back of an app we created. And this is what they had. Across 70 wards, they had a reduction in 27% in the number of falls. A smaller numbers, but a 67% reduction in the number of pressure sores, because it's hard to get a pressure sores when you're up and about. A reduction in length of stay of 1.8 days. If you, in the 5 most engaged wards, medical wards, they had a 2.1 day reduction in length of stay. That is not insignificant. And here's the poster girl of the campaign. I love that response. She's gorgeous, isn't she? Because that's a happy person. And as Jason said, on the 10th to 12th of July, we're going to hold a global summit, which will be online on the endpjparalysis.org website. And you can register now, and what we'll do is send you a text of I'll be putting together the program. It'll be 8 hours in Australasia, 8 hours in Europe, UK, Middle East, 8 hours North America, go around again, 8 hours at a time. And we'll have 72 slots, and there'll be 30 to 45 minutes sessions. And we will record them, so if something's going on in the middle of the night of Australia, you'll be able to watch it at a later date. And it'll all be free. And because it's about how do we have conversations that we have a global one. And I had a message overnight from the United States, and they've got 25 presentations alone, so we're going to do some work around that as well, which is great. And we're going to go for a break, if only to thaw. This man here, this man I've never met. This is Jack. And Jack was on the back of the Everything You Wanted to Know About NPJ Paralysis booklet we wrote. And I look at this picture of Jack, who's in Salford in the intestinal failure unit, and I look at this man. He's no longer a patient. That's Jack. And I really fancy going for a pint with Jack. And I want to say to Jack, what was it with the tattoos? What's the story? And by the way, why belt and braces? You know, because this is no longer a compendium of disease. This is a human with a backstory. And I'll tell you something else about Jack. If he is 70, in 1969 he was a 20-year-old. And I can tell you what, on the 75th anniversary day of the D-Day landings, Jack, 24 years later, in 1969, was not listening to Dame Vera Lynn. He was listening to The Who, The Stones, The Beatles, Black Sabbath, Clearance Clearwater Revival, Bad Moon Rising. You know, that was his soundtrack. And, you know, the soundtrack of our lives is between the ages of about 15 and 25 years of age. And you have people with dementia, and you create a Spotify playlist. You find out what age they are. Work out what they would have been at the age of 20. Create a Spotify playlist. Put some earphones on them and watch what happens. Because if one thing Shakespeare was right about is that music soothes the savage beast. And you see these folk, and they're kind of bopping away back in their day, and they're giving themselves physio. And they're at peace. And I think we should do a lot more of that. This is about creative ways of valuing people's times. Because sometimes we're so worried, thinking so much about reminiscence, we forget, what about also creating new memories for old people? And I think sometimes we treat old people as if they've got all the time in the world. And yet, to my mind, they're the ones in the biggest hurry. So enabling them to have great moments is important. Remembering that Bad Moon Rising, and my favorite song of that era, by the way, was Peter Sarstedt, because it is the classic NPJ Paralysis song. Where did you go to, my lovely? You'll know you've nailed it with mobilization when you're saying, I have no idea where they were. Where did you go to, my lovely? Because they got up and walked around. And why are we not saying to patients, rather than your families coming to you at the bedside, why don't you make your way down to the canteen and meet them in that nice space? And by the way, here's a buzzer if we need you back. You know, there's a cardiologist called Eric Topol, and he talks about we'll have nailed it in healthcare when there's a sign over the patient's bed that says, the patient's ready to see you now, doctor. Then we'll know we have nailed it in terms of valuing time, because, you know, it is not about our time, it's about their time. It's about the preciousness of all of those things. It's about letting people know what's coming next so there's no surprises. So we're communicating so there's fewer complaints. So we're making it easy and making it fun. It's about doing the right thing and making the right thing to do the easiest thing to do. And I think the easiest thing to do to reduce the incidence of hypothermia is to, now I know there's no tea apparently, but it's now 9 minutes to 10. There's not a child. This is one of the very few things, very few lecture halls I've been in where there's a clock at the back of the room. If you ever present, that's the one thing you need is a clock, not behind you, because you don't want people saying, oh my God, is this only this time yet? Or you've got the back of the room. So it's 9 minutes. Would you be happy to come back today? So just make it a comfort break for about 12 minutes, or just about midday. Sorry, midday? You can go off you can go then and have as much comfort as you like. So about 10 minutes, and we'll reconvene in about 10 minutes, and we'll try and do something with the fires. So. Right, lovely people, welcome back. So, it's an Irish 10 minutes. It's like traffic lights at home, you know, we think of them as a suggestion. So, and as a by the by, you know, Mrs. Brown's Boys, you know, you all, yeah? You know how you all think that it's a comedy? In Ireland, we think of it as a documentary. It's, you know. I look at it and think, that's my sister Denise and her 6 kids, you know. So, there you go. So what we talked about is, we've talked about NPJ paralysis in the form of deconditioning, and why time is the connecting currency of healthcare, and what you can do when individuals start to take ownership of things. Which leads us neatly now into culture. Because culture is around this, is that culture doesn't change simply because we say it should change. It changes because people's behavior and everyday realities change. That's what culture is. And how many of you have, got your first management job, you know, whether it's a ward manager or therapy manager, and you got it because you didn't quite get out the way quick enough? You know, would you mind acting up for 6 months while somebody's on maternity leave or sick leave? Anyone had that experience? Anyone? Absolutely. How many have not had that experience? And what happens, or we get a new job on its own merit, and you think, I'm going to be the best there's ever been at this job. I am going to be absolutely amazing. But you still don't feel good enough. You know, you kind of think any day now the HR department is going to tap me on the shoulder and say, so embarrassing, it should never have been you. Sorry, would you go back to doing what you did? It's called imposter syndrome. And it's really prevalent. You know, the day you qualify is the day you realize you actually don't know very much. You know? Or you get a new job and people have got great faith in you and you think, I have no faith in me. Because you don't feel you're quite good enough. And you work harder and harder and you become fairly successful, but still you don't feel good enough. And feel shame and guilt and doubt. And it's that spiral of despair that no matter how hard you work, no matter how many hours you put in, you never feel you're enough. And it's about the conversations you have. Because sometimes you say, well, yeah, that's all very well, but see, I'm in this job now, but I still have nobody listens to me. And no matter how senior a person might be, nobody listens. I have no real voice in this organization. I got no say, no control. And mope syndrome, you're probably wondering, is that a new DRG? Again, how many nurses in the room? Just so quick. Lots. See, as nurses, we suffer this more than anyone. And it stands for the most oppressed people ever. It's all very well for those doctors. They get their study leave. Those therapists, they wander in and out of the ward, Here we are, You can smell, it's like, Jesus, Joe, would you get off the bonfire? We need the wood. We do martyrdom amazingly. You can smell the burning, so you can. And a lot of it's in our attitudes and our choices. And we've got to step up and lean in and get past ourselves at times about our own attitudes and how we shape our attitudes. And one thing I'd ask is this, and this I think is something that us as nurses need to own. Since when was it the physio's job to get the patient up out of bed and mobilize them? When was that their job? And why is it that people will spend a whole weekend in bed because we don't have physios at weekends and they're going backwards deconditioning? And I would love it if we were shutting rehab beds. Because too many people go to rehabilitation to recondition from the deconditioning that occurred during their acute phase. And we will know it's a measure of a successful system when we are closing or repurposing rehab beds. That's when we'll know something is going right in our system. And this is not about rehab people who are passionate about what they do. It's about why did it happen in the first place. So we need to look past ourselves about what we control, what we own, and that's about identifying what are the above and below line behaviors. And that's about us taking responsibility and ownership and even accountability for our own actions. But also avoiding the excuses, the blame, the denial that it's everybody else. Because that's the trapped victimhood. And why do people not call each other out? Well, they don't, because they don't know, it's not articulated what is okay and what is not okay. And when you start as a team where you work, in your unit, start writing down, what do we think is good, above the line, that we should celebrate and give each other a high five when you catch an act of kindness, when you see somebody doing something amazing? What do we laud? And also, what do we say, do you know what, as a team, we said this wasn't okay. Because it shouldn't come from the Band 7. It should come from everyone. It should come from the health. I know this is a healthcare support worker. Where are you? Yeah, absolutely. Oh, there's a few of you. Brilliant. Even better. Because we know when I talked about the orderlies and the cleaners, your job in mobilizing patients is crucial. You are so important. And why shouldn't you be able to speak up as much as anybody? So when you make it visible, so much of that stuff that's hidden in plain sight becomes safer to talk about. But, you know, it's about having clear purposes, because ownership requires clarity and vision. It requires purpose. It requires communicating well. It involves involving and engaging others. Because this is how it works. Big changes and cultural shifts all start somewhere, usually with one person, just one. You look at what Chloe Harris has done. She started it, and then another person started it, and then other wards in Salisbury started it, and then they put it on Twitter, and before you know it, everyone is doing it. I know this awesome woman, Rebecca, ran the Liverpool Marathon in her pajamas. How cool is this woman? She is worth her weight in petrol. Because it's also, I bet you, it's fun. And Steve Forsyth, who's Director of Nursing in the Mental Health Division and Learning Disabilities in Betsy Godwalliger, he does the same sort of thing. But you know, you can't change with the same mindset. It's about recalibrating how you think, because the way to fix problems is to think differently. So what I'd like you to do is, I'd like you now, if you would, is to grab a biro or a pen. If you're in New Zealand, or if I was a Kiwi, I'd say grab a pen. And you're not going to be writing anything down, but what I do want you to do is find somebody who is your neighbour. You won't have to look too far. You go that way or that way. And I would like you, what you'll be doing is working in pairs. So if it's an even number on your row, that's great. If it's not, then look downwards. There might be somebody odd in front of you. So work out who is your neighbour. Okay, this will make it easy. There's 4 of you there. That's life. Right, have you got it? Very important job ahead of you. Are you ready? What I would like you to do for the next couple of minutes is I would like you to sell your biro to you. Your neighbour's got one. Start selling your pen to your neighbour. You've got 2 minutes. Your life depends on it. Away you go. Right. Well, I'll tell you what. There was some ferocious horse trading going on in here just now. So what was your sales pitch? How were you selling your pen to your neighbour? What was your sales? You grab your microphone as well, Rebecca. What was your sales pitch? Yes, please. Yep.
I was sold a very positive pink pen, not quite as bold as a bright red one, but something that would stand out with enthusiasm. It was sold to me, wouldn't swap for my yellow highlighter.
Very good. It is loud and expressive, my pen. Please take it. Very good. Who else? Can you get the thing?
Yeah. So this incredible salesperson next to me obviously knows me very well, because she pitched a whole idea that the pen was able to tap into your creativity just by the mere thought of touching it, and that all your creative thoughts would come through your, I don't know where she will come down your arm, and I believed her. I honestly believed her, and I was willing to give up my iPad and my pencil just so that I could have her crappy Swalek pen. So she knew who she was selling to.
You have your Harry Potter moments.
Yes.
Very good. So somebody, yes, please.
We were just talking about what kind of pens that we had, and then at the end of that conversation, we were talking about what kinds of person you might need to have to be a salesperson. And I've just realised now that it was all about what I thought about the pen and the kind of pen I thought the other person should have, rather than asking, what kind of pen are you looking for? And then using that to sell it.
Very good. Anybody else? Yes, please.
I actually managed to swap 6 pens for a multifunctional 4-coloured pen. Amazing.
Fantastic.
Going to buy me one later.
I had a finance manager who said, yeah, I don't think I like the red colour. So let me ask you, and I know you did, but how many of you asked the other person when you were selling your pen what they wanted to buy? Because here's the thing, this is not so much an exercise in selling pens, it's an exercise in influencing skills. Thank you. Because, we don't like to be sold, but we do like to buy. And how many of you have ever walked into a shop, and before you know it, the sales assistant is on you, and you go, would you just leave me alone? I will decide when I want to buy something. And actually, sometimes we walk out of shops because we were being sold. And in influencing, it's often the case that, has anyone had this experience where there you are, you're in the shower one morning, you're washing your hair, and you suddenly think, oh, of course, we've been thinking about this for ages. Oh my God, wait till the staff hear about my amazing idea. They're going to be so excited when I tell them. And then you go to work, and you're selling your idea, and they're all going, yeah, nah. Because, by the way, the Irish word for no is, I will, yeah. And have you had that experience? Because we have. Because when it comes to influencing, we don't want to be sold. We don't want to be told. If you said to me, would you like to buy my pen? I'd say, I've got thousands of them. I don't need another pen. They all work until I want to write down a phone number for some reason. But I don't need another pen. But if you said to me, could you make use of this? I'd say, do you know what? Actually, that would make a really pretty decent ruler. That's pretty straight. And because it's a bit cold in here, I could stick it in the door and use it as a door jamb. Or maybe use it as a bookmark, because I don't need a pen, but now you've sold me a door jamb, a pencil, a ruler, a bookmark. That's what I wanted. I mean, iPads, like Becky was talking about, they are, we now have apps that fix problems we never knew we had. And when it comes to stuff, it's really about thinking, how do I influence? And influencing is not selling. Influencing is getting people to buy. Because we don't make decisions rationally. Spoiler alert, we do not make them with evidence. We make our decisions emotionally and apply post hoc rationalization to justify what can be a terrible decision. If you look at the cold, hard evidence, I was reading the New Statesman. Now, the New Statesman magazine is a writer-centre journal, and there was an emeritus professor of economics of Oxford writing a paper about why other countries cannot understand why the UK is pursuing Brexit. Very, very measured, very understated. Really is a good, if you just look it up, it's this week's Statesman. And what was really striking is this is an evidence-based conversation. And you hear Boris Johnson saying, we're going to go out of, come what may, these heroic, bringing back the Churchillian, Dunkirk was not good. 300,000 soldiers were left behind. There's nothing particularly heroic, and this sort of, and talks about the Little Englander type of respect. Now, if you look at the whole cold, hard evidence for Brexit, you look at Bridgend, the Ford's execs are meeting them in, the end that factory could go this week, or to be announced this week. Brexit is not good for this country, for this nation. It is just not good. It's just not good. But a lot of people, it's not about the evidence. And it doesn't mean the people who voted Brexit are thick. That is a massive mistake. One of the big mistakes of the Remain side is they thought the evidence would be enough. Nigel Farage created a party about 8 weeks ago, no domestic policies, no nothing, and yet had the biggest number of votes in the European elections. It's because people offering simple solutions to complex problems are more attractive. It's when people connect with their heart, they will do so with their heart before they do so with their heads. It's never, ever about the evidence. That is not enough. And I said to somebody during the break, no number will persuade somebody. What persuades people are stories. That's how we connect. But Simon Sinek has written a number of books now, and one of his TED Talks has been viewed, I think it's about 35 million times now. It's called How Leaders Inspire Action. And he talks about the golden circle. This idea that came to him, mimics in many ways the triune brain. But he talks about how most people, in fact everyone, can tell you what they do. UHW can tell you what it does. Landoc can tell you what it does. The people who make that little camera thing there, or the people who make the paint on our wall here, they can tell you what they do. Most can tell you how they go about doing it, with the processes and all that sort of stuff, but very few talk about why. And when it comes to sales, most sales are, look at, we've got this brand new thing. It's mostly what? And what's this computer over here? It is a symposium. God knows what that is. Let's just pretend it's an Acer computer. How do Acer or Dell sell their computers? We have a brand new computer. It is half the width of the last one. It is half the weight and it is twice as fast. It's got amazing features and benefits. It's so much better than the last one we had. How do we make it? We've got amazing engineers. Would you like to buy one? Don't care? Black box? I could go to Dell, Acer, Sony, Symposium, anything. I do not connect with that because you just gave me numbers and facts. What is it that Apple does? What they do is they start with why. Because the way Apple sell their products is they'll say things like, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. We believe with a stroke of fingers you can open up a world of song and voice and internet. How do we make it? We've got amazing engineers in Cupertino who think differently. And what is it called? It's called an iPhone. And people will queue at midnight for a phone they can walk in off the street a week later and buy. It's true, isn't it? Why? Because when people believe what you believe, they will follow you because they connect emotionally. And when you're seeking to influence others, find out what they're seeking. If you think of, Alan Pithy, Chief of Medicine or now retired semi-retired Chief of Medicine in Christchurch, fabulous man. And he and I were involved in setting up an acute medical assessment unit about 10, 12 years ago in Christchurch. And we were on our way back from the labs. And he ran into one of the consultants. And he said to him, we're setting up an AMAL because we think that's the best place for medically acute unwell patients to go rather than the emergency departments. But the more of us who are on the consultant rota, the better the workload will be. What is it you would want to go on the rota? Because we'd love your input. And your man said to him, if I can get blood as quickly as I do in ED, and I get x-rays and radiology as fast as I can in the emergency department, then absolutely sign me up. It'd be a much better environment, better for the regs, everything, be a much better place. But that's what I would want. Remember I said we're come back, we run away from the labs. We already had it. But had he done the more traditional way of selling, which is, just back from the labs, we've got radiology, we're on x-rays, and we'll get bloods, we can do it all. What would you like if you wanted to sign the roster? What do you think your man might say? Jeez, if I can get that without asking for anything, what I'll do is I'll ask for a registrar. Yes, I need another reg. And before you know it, it's all falling apart. Can you see how, when you try and sell, you might give away stuff, but by listening, you find out what people may want, and it may be a lot more modest. So influencing skills really are about listening to what people want, finding out what their stories are, what matters to them. And start it early. Don't wait. You know, there's no point having a sign. There's, what are we waiting for? An RCT. When do we want it? Now. That's not going to cut it. Because, you know, waiting for the evidence won't be enough. Start small. Start now. Start listening. Because what people do is they get very, very excited. But they get excited about the things that don't actually help. Because what we get involved in is our real big circle of concern. Others' behaviors, others' interactions, others' things that are about their attitudes, the things actually we've got no control over. And the circle of influence is our own attitudes, interactions, behaviors, the things we can do something about. And you think about a hospital, you know, at system level. You have operating theatres complaining bitterly that if ICU could see more patients, they could do more operations. ICU are complaining bitterly about the wards, because, God, can I not manage sick people on a ward anymore? We've got to keep them in here. You've got the wards that saying everyone's getting at us, it's not very fair. And ED are saying, yeah, but we're brilliant, it's just beds. You know, it's everyone else. And what we're really good at doing is fixing everyone else's problems instead of focusing on the things we can control. And although it's unusual for a nurse to do this role, I was a clinical director of a couple of emergency departments in south of England. So I was an exec director on the South Coast as well. And what I said to my team is, look, we will stop whinging about the wards. Medicine, we're hanging out the doors, and we ask medicine, can you give us a bed? We really need to get a patient up to the wards. And they do so somehow, and an hour later, the patient is still on our unit. That is not okay. Because our internal professional standard will be, when we get a bed, we will have that patient out of here in 15 minutes. Because effectively, although it's called admission, what we're really doing is discharging them from our unit to another place. Most of them we discharge home, some of them we discharge to a ward. It's all about timeliness. It's never about volume in ED, it's about flow. The registrar, the urology reg, who wouldn't come down because they were just messing about. If you let me know, I will have a word with his consultant, his clinical director, so it'll be a CD to CD conversation, and that clinical director will bring in the urology reg and have a come to Jesus conversation with him. But we can't fix it if we don't know it. We need to work as a team. But what we will do is only do things we can control. And the more we focused on the things we could control, the more our influence grew. Because as we got our house in order, everyone started to say, you know what, we need to step up. And in January one year, middle of January, and these were two departments that both saw 65,000 patients. One of them had no patients, not a single patient waiting for more than 4 hours in the week in January. So you can influence others to that extent when you influence yourself, because leadership starts with you. And here's somebody where leadership started with her. 1st December 1955, Rosa Parks, a quiet, introverted, 42-year-old seamstress, got on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama, and she didn't start the civil rights movement that day. She lit the flame that started it, but she had a lifetime history of activism for black people's rights. But on this day, James Blake, after a couple of stops, the bus driver said, get to the back of the bus. And on that fateful day, she said no. And why did he want her to go towards the back of the bus? Because she was black. That was the only reason. And you go to the coloreds section because that's where you belong, not in the white people section. She said no, and she got arrested. And in her being arrested within a few hours, her action of sitting down had hundreds of people marching. And within a day or two, another man got involved in what became the Montgomery bus boycott. A young black Baptist minister called Martin Luther King. And when she sat down, and then a few hundred marched, And on 28th of August 1963, hundreds of thousands marched in Washington Mall, where he talked about his dream. And he talked about how he dreamt of a day when his 4 black daughters could play with 4 young white children, and they'd be judged not on the color of the skin, but on the content of their character. He talked about the mighty streams of consciousness rolling down the Mississippi. He talked about justice in form of the promissory note that was offered to black Americans that was bankrupt because they were not giving the justice and freedom that they were entitled to. What he did is Martin Luther King talked about his dream. He didn't say, now, I've brought a 10-point plan, and I'd like us all to read it. Because that will never connect people. What he connected was with people's hearts. And here's the other thing. Many of the people there would not be there because of them. Many of them, 40%, were not black. They were white Americans. They were from the Indian subcontinent, from Southeast Asia. They were Native Americans. They were from Mexico. They believed what he believed, and that's why they were following him. They connected personally. But what happens so often is leaders under-communicate far too much. How many of you, let me just ask you a question. How many of you have got children or ever been one? Because have you ever noticed with children, has anyone ever, as a parent especially, ever had the experience of you say to your child, please don't do that again, and they go, okay. That's a no then as well. Because you do, you have to say it again and again. You do, don't you? Again and again and again, you wear your voice out. Why do you think it's any different for staff? And doing things like, I called a meeting, I don't know why they didn't change. I sent an email. Why won't they do what I asked? Because you cannot over-communicate. And questions don't mean resistance. Questions mean people are trying to understand. And questions come from that 4-letter word, safe. If I agree, will I be safe? If I agree, will a patient come to harm? If I agree and something goes wrong, what will happen to me? I think most questions come from, I'm trying to process this because right now this change doesn't make me feel safe. And when we take time and patience and persistence and understanding and reframe it, the people are not being awkward, they just want to know, will it be okay? Because first it takes time, you need to be real honest and open, because first people change and then organizations change, and it is in that sequence. But when you first start out, it's not a hill, it's a mountain when you start out the climb. And the more you do it, and the harder you push, eventually you get to that tipping point where today's heresy becomes tomorrow's orthodoxy, becomes the day after's old-fashioned way of doing stuff, because this is how we are. Because culture is what happens when nobody's looking. You look at an organization, think of it as an iceberg. On the top 1/8, you have the org chart, you have the policies and procedures, you have the job titles, and most of it is, but this is how we work around here. You remember when we were all baby clinicians? And you go on a placement, you go from one ward, and you might go 20 meters to another ward, and it was a whole new country. True, isn't it? And who was the biggest determinant of the culture of the ward? Ward sister. It could be a really long run or a short, happy run, depending on, and that's why nursing sisters, the charge nurses, absolutely have to step up. Just had another book out, because I'm that pretentious now, it's number 7. And we've got 2 in the pipeline, but this was on with Amy Overend, a Band 7 NICU nurse in Bolton. And it's a wards manager's leadership and survival guide. And we wrote this thing, and we inherited this book. There had been 2 editions, and when we started writing it back last August, I think we started writing, and it's only about 70,000 words, so we had it in by October. It came out in December. And we started looking at it and then realized actually the tone of the book from the previous author was shocking. We were quite shocked. We would message each other, and you can't do a book without actually meeting up. We would message and said, oh my God, look on page 54. And it would have things like, bear in mind it's aimed at ward managers, and it would have things like, if anyone comes into your office and says, have you got a minute? Make sure you look at your watch before you say yes. Can I just point out, this is not good practice. This is not, never be caught eating lunch at your desk, because it shows how bad a manager you are and you're not in control. Well, that's most of you screwed, isn't it? You know. And what we were trying to inject into it, obviously, there was a whole chapter. Never trust a non-clinical manager. They're always looking for something. Therapists, they're not good for nursing, sort of thing. I paraphrase, you know. You are the most important person there. Never forget that. And you kind of think, oh my God. And Amy messaged me once and said, Brian, take a seat, grab a gin, read the Amazon reviews, because people thought the previous editions were okay. They were fantastic. And actually it wasn't. There's things like managing yourself, managing meetings, managing your team, managing managing your budgets, all that kind of stuff, how to recruit. So a very practical thing. But what we injected in, we ended up rewriting 70% of that book, and we're still not happy, we'll do more. We injected kindness. We injected kindness into it. Said, always remember, your team succeeds because you help them succeed. Your job is to serve, not just to lead. Your job is to be supportive and kind, not just be transactional and telling. Growing your people is your legacy. And if they succeed and go on to amazing things, you know, you can bask in their glory, not be threatened by it. That's the tone we adopted. The next edition, when I do it, we're probably 2020. I've already identified a therapist who's a podiatrist, good friend Krishna, and it won't be aimed at nurses only. This will be award managers for nurses and therapists. Because personally, I love it when I see occupational therapists and physios in practice who become ward managers. So when you think about it, ward management isn't just about nursing, it's about leadership. And I've seen just because you're a therapist doesn't make you a great ward manager, but doesn't make you a bad one. It's not just about nursing, it's about leadership. So we're moving in a very different place now, and the future of workforce will be about competency. And that's the exciting thing I think we've got ahead of us. And change only happens one step at a time. It's first one step and then another, and you keep going and you keep going. Because every single person in the health system makes a difference and matters to someone or something. And Rebecca and I were just talking about healthcare support workers. And sometimes, you know, we kind of forget, and I kind of still feel like the 18-year-old who came in, you know, 4,000 years ago into nursing. But you kind of forget how people perceive you as senior. And sometimes you kind of forget how much that matters. And, you know, when you are walking down the corridor and you're thinking about how am I going to get a patient out today and I'm doing all stuff, and you walk past the healthcare worker or the cleaner, you may not notice them, but they'll notice you didn't acknowledge them. And that stuff matters. And and let's not call people the students when we're talking about nursing students. Let's not call them the junior doctors. Let's not label an amorphous group as the. People have a name, and let's find out what it is. Hello, my name is really matters. I'll be talking to Chris Poynton tomorrow, you know, his wife, you know, who sadly died. But that's the stuff that matters. It's the personal stuff. And as we finished our conversation, we were saying, it's the soft stuff that is the hard stuff, always. And diagnostics is knowing what does good look like. You know, how do you know you're doing well? How do you know you're better than you were last year? How do you know you're making a difference? And I do love this Palestinian proverb. You can't fatten a cow by weighing it. I love that. If you will, what month of the year do 70% of new gym subscriptions start? What month of all? January. And what are the 2 reasons why people join a gym in January? 2 reasons: lose weight and get fit. So there you are. You go to the gym all excited, you're legging it up and down the run, you're doing all the weights. Following day, you jump on the scale, it's like, oh, look, I've lost 60 grams, I can stop now. I can do 2 steps, not 1, I'm fine. The thing is this, unless you, measures themselves don't constitute improvement, but unless you are measuring, how do you know you're getting any better? You know, that's what's important. Because some is not a number and soon is not a time. So you need to have something attached. Every February, I run the Race to Remember, or most Februaries when I'm around to do so. And it's about 10 Ks over the Port Hills of Christchurch. So I know I've got a date, I've got a distance, I need to get fitter to be doing it and running around and not stopping, you know, grabbing oxygen. And so I know what I've got to do. And that's the kind of thing. So having a goal is really important, because the minute you give yourself a target, you are much more likely to hit it. And there's 3 measures. There's outcome measures. Did we do well? Is it better or was it worse? You know, your outcome measures. Process measures are what most targets are based on. The 4 hours in an emergency department is not an outcome measure. It's what percentage of patients were out of ED in 4 hours? What percentage of patients had their operation within X weeks? What a percentage of patients saw the physio, the OT, the doctor in this time? It could be terrible care. They could have a rotten experience, but what you've done is measured the process. Balancing measures are also really important. In fact, it's probably one of the most important, because for every intervention, because measures drive behavior, you need to ensure the behavior ends up in a good outcome. So if you are mobilizing patients, a balancing measure would be, do more people fall? Because you don't want an unintended harm as a consequence of a measure that you had as an outcome or process measure. Does that make sense? So every measure should have a balancing measure around it. Because what followers always need is clarity. And the 3 clarities are clarity of purpose, that is your why. Clarity of plan, which is your how and your what. And clarity of responsibility is your who. And when you have that clarity in a team, you'll know you're going to be more successful, because everyone knows what their job is, why they're doing it, how they're doing it, and what it is they need to do. But the trick is keep it simple. Because if you can't explain it simply, it often means you don't understand it. And if you look at the murmuration, it's a great word, isn't it? Murmuration of swallows. By the way, do you know why they do this? It's anti-predator behavior in swallows. Because what they're trying to do is get into the center so they won't be attacked by the hawks. So they go in like this, and it's, you know, what you have is a very complex adaptive system. Yes, a collection of parts, yes, they're interconnected, but they also connect independently. And the action of one, as one flies off the other way and then others follow, you see this amazing ballet in the autumn evenings. And that is complex adaptive systems. So what happens in a medical oncology ward can have a domino effect out. Diagnostics, for example, you may be hitting budget, but actually the consequence for waiting times can be quite profound. Can you see how they're all interconnected? And putting a man on, it's all been men so far, putting a man on the moon, that was complicated. Computers are complicated, but raising children is complex. Can I just ask a question? How many of you got more than one child? Quite a number of you. How many of you have ever thought, well, maybe we could raise them using a Gantt chart? Because it's all pretty... If we do it with one, we could do it with all of them. Anybody here from ED? Can I just check in? You know, because their end goal is that they become an ED doctor, you know. So, but has anyone had you got more than one child and you think, how come 2 parents have the same child and they're completely different? Has anyone got that experience? Like, are you sure we're the parents? You know, can we send them back? So the trick is really, it's about keeping it simple, and really, if you like, applying values to people, because it's very quickly they stop being told what to do, and all you can be is a guide at best. And red to green is around creating simple rules, and safer is the same. And what it is the ABCs: attitudes, behaviors, culture. Simple as that. And when it comes to red days, are you familiar, by the way, with red days and green days? I'll talk about them in a moment. If you're not, I'm going to quickly get to it. Do not performance manage any of this stuff. You should not be performance managing NPJ paralysis or get up, get dressed, and moving. You should not be performance managing anything. Because if you performance management, you kill it, because it's then a transaction where the measuring stick becomes a beating stick rather than something that's intrinsically the right thing to do. And a red day is when a patient receives a little that adds value. They have a test, or they don't get a test done. They have a test, but it's not reported. They have a test that's not reported, and the patient that is reported, and they don't get to know about it. The medical care plan lacks a consultant-improved expected date of discharge. There is no consultant approval for physiological, functional, clinical criteria for discharge. A red day is a patient who's in a hospital bed that doesn't need to be. That's a red day. Whereas a green day is a day when everything that happens should have happened and they're moving on their journey. It's about keeping it simple, which in essence is this. A red day is when not everything happens that should have happened. And the Safer Patient Flow Bundle was created by Pete Gordon, who is an ICU nurse by background, and SAFER stands for Senior Review. All patients have an expected date of discharge. It's about flow. It's about early discharge, a third before midday, and a review of standard patients. I would put no more money into emergency departments and putting them at the back end, because you can't get them out, you cannot get them in. It's based on the ventilator-acquired pneumonia bundle that Peter Provenance did in Johns Hopkins. So it's based on a clinical model of improvement. So everyone has seen a review. This is Gordon Caldwell, who's now back in Scotland. Batching tasks, and I know you made the point about checklists, but sometimes it's about what we do is we have a checklist and then the junior doctors rush back to do the meds. So we have batching of activities. So what you have is a checklist which is about informing, not just simply a checklist for its own sake. Everyone has an expected, not a estimated date of discharge, expected, because an estimate is a guess, we don't really care. And expected is we will be going home on Friday the 8th. Everyone's got a plan, and here's a really good, clear discharge plan. Treat with oxygen to maintain the MAT 72 oxygenation of 82 to 92%. Nebulized bronchodilators and oral prednisolone, and for follow-up with the acute respiratory service at home on discharge. Clinical criteria for discharge: able to maintain saturations without oxygen in the 88 to 92% range. Able to manage to go to the toilet. Able to mobilize 10 yards. Expected date of discharge, I really like this, at 11 o'clock. Because what you're doing is, now anyone who knows of private hospitals, that's what they will be. You will be leaving at this time. If you're an hour late, you can charge more. I'm going to Portsmouth in a few weeks to do some stuff, and I'm turning up, because I'm in Salford University that evening. It'll be a really late arrival, about midnight. And so I'm doing it on booking.com, and I got a message back from, yeah, because it's a 24-hour day desk, but because you're going to come in at about midnight, there'll be a £30 charge. And I've written back, said, noted, that will be in my feedback to be booking.com. Because I wouldn't have stayed there had I known they were going to charge me 30 quid to come in at midnight. Can you see how it's turned, well, it's a really nice place where we're going to stay, the one-bedroom apartment. Two, actually, I'm really unimpressed already. And when it comes to discharge, it can be fabulous care, but it all kind of goes to hell in a handbasket at the back end because they're waiting. And the patients are told they're going home that day, and they're all excited, and they've got their antler suitcase all ready to go. And then the relatives is wrong, and say, oh, I didn't know they were going home. Okay, that's fine. I'm at work, but I'll come and pick them up at 4. And they come in, that's not right. And what are they often waiting for? TTOs, tablets. Now, as any pharmacist in here, I have yet to find a pharmacist who says, oh, God, I'd love some work. But here's a question. Why is it, given that well over like 95% of patients who go home are on the same medications that they were on the day before? Therefore, it is not new work to do the TTOs. Why could we not do it the day before so we don't have that lag? Because it's not creating work, it's actually doing it in a different timing. And you think about our surgical colleagues, years ago that would be done on the day. Now most of the oral anti-Bs are done at as the post-op load to say, you know, patient will receive amoxicillin for 7 days or whatever it might be. So it's changed more than anything a culture of timing, not the work. And we could smooth that out. And if you get 6 patients out 4 hours early, what you've created is a bed day. Because it's back to the way we look at stuff that's hidden in plain sight. And you don't have to wait for every doctor to start with one. Because that's how change happens, not as a big campaign, but starting small and building big. Gordon making a statement, we scheduled our discharges for 9 o'clock, so then our nurses pull the patients from the aim out early, and we start the flow early. And it works for them. Having things like early discharge, the patients will be out before midday, because you need early flow to have early discharge. What time do most of the ward managers go, and many doctors go, and therapists go? It's around this sort of time. So effectively what we're doing is getting most of the discharge at a time when it's becoming less and less safe. And there are many late discharges as well. So we can bring, what happens is you've got this batching that goes on at this front end and the discharging at that end. And it's like traffic trying to get past itself. So if we have, this is where there's absolutely no beds and people lying with scared husbands in an ambulance because there's nothing going on anywhere. And if you pull it forward, what you get is much better flow. And also, why do people not get people out early? Well, because if you discharge someone, that means more work. And that's what I think what a lot of it's about. And it's actually what it creates is more work when you don't, because it's quite scary trying to do it all at once. And you look at the consequences, you get the late transfers in the afternoon. When you get them up by midday, you can see here what impact it started to have in terms of the discharge rate by midday in Gordon's work, and also nurse-facilitated or criteria-based discharge from 8.5% up to the mid-40s. A stamp or a sticky label, we used one of these in Christchurch on a Friday. Every patient has to have a plan on a Friday afternoon, for all of them. What that means is more patients going out the weekends, which means Mondays are not quite as ugly. It's kind of pulls together, and having clear criteria, having it named and identified. And this is on the Chief Executive Barnett, Steve, is an intensivist by training. This is a letter apparently he has framed in his office. It says, "Dear Sir or Madam, this is a request for an immediate discharge from this hospital as soon as possible. The reason being that I feel the process of discharge is taking far too long and I wish to leave the hospital as soon as possible. If this request is refused, then I will take it upon myself to walk out of this hospital, yours sincerely." And there's a patient who values their time enough that if your process isn't right, I'm leaving anyway. And I love the fact that Steve has kept that, but this is the 4 questions every patient should know. First of all, what is wrong with me and what are you looking for? What's going to happen now, today, tomorrow, and what could you get me sorted out? What do I need to do to get home? What is the things that needs to happen? Because back to baseline is a hopeless phrase. How do you assess a baseline in a hospital setting? And by the way, why are we asking people to do 25 yards or meters when they're at home? They sleep in the bed, in the chair, because they might have COPD. They sleep in a chair downstairs. They go to the toilet and go to the kitchen. Their world is this size. Why do we want to walk over there? You know, why would we do that to people? So making it real. And finally, what would happen if my recovery is ideal and there are no delays? What day am I going? When am I leaving? And here's a tip. Do a quick and dirty audit on your unit. Hand it out to patients. Ask them to fill it in. And then do exactly the same audit with the staff. And what it'll smoke out is the communication gaps between the disciplines. And it's quite a sobering experience because most people actually don't know, and I think it's important that they all do. And, you know, it's also about thinking like a farmer. Because you think about it, farmers never shout at their crops. They don't blame them for not growing. They don't uproot them before they've had a chance to grow. They actually choose the best plants, the people in the process. They irrigate, they fertilize, they motivate, they inspire. They get rid of the obstacles, the weeds, and they realize that they're not predictable. There is no point sacking the farmer. It's a bit like sacking Len. I mean, why would you do that? It just doesn't make sense to sack the farmer if the weeds, the flops won't go. And then finally, what's the word? The one before the last one. Penultimately, is then what are the things that you do? And it's about creating an energy for action. And here's a tip if you're in a leadership role. Give the followers the credit. Because without followers, there is no leader. And if you're a leader without any followers, all you are is just some random off out for a walk. And really good leaders will give more credit to others than they, they'll take less credit than they deserve. They'll also take more blame sometimes than they deserve as well, because they'll stand in front of the bullets. And I was talking, it might have been last night or it might have been sometime yesterday, I was in Gloucester. And I was talking to some folk and I was saying, I had a senior general manager who worked for me in the emergency department. And I was away for 2 weeks leave, and she came in and she said, "Look, I know we've got," when we came back that day, she said, "I know we're supposed to catch up at 10:30. Could I see you at 8:30? I said, yeah, sure, no problem. So I was like, no. She says, "Look, things are fine in ED, but I just need to know when you're next going on holidays." I said, "Well, I'll let you know." She says, "Well, it's just I'm going to need to take sick leave when you go. I had no idea what you had to put up with because I was accountable to CE. And I said, well, my job was standing in front of any bullets that were coming your way. That was what my job is, so you could get on with yours. And that's important. Sometimes our job is about that. But how many of you have had the experience that you had an idea that someone took and claimed it as their own? And what happens the next time? You make sure you don't. Because here's the other thing. Perfect is the enemy of better. And sometimes we're so busy waiting for the circumstances to be right, we don't start. It's like, oh yeah, no, we the budgets, we haven't got the staffing, we haven't got the budgets, there isn't a Y in the month this year. But we said we start in January, we just didn't say which one. Sometimes you just have to start. Don't wait for everyone to start. Start with one person who says yes and build it from there. And never, ever underestimate the power of giving people permission to act. Our collective jobs, especially in a senior role, we are directors of permission giving. That's what our real job. A junior doctor has his idea, and you're a senior consultant. Say, absolutely. A healthcare support worker thinks, could we do something different with catheters, you know, where we keep all the catheter equipment? Say yes. And celebrate that success, because they will help you blossom as well. That's the secret of success. And management, I was saying management is really not hard. What it's about is respecting people and listening to them and giving permission and helping them flourish. That's all it is. There's no secret sauce to it. So what can you do? What can you do? And I'm going to ask you to think about it and then have a conversation with your neighbours. What could you do next Tuesday to make it a little bit better? What could happen on Change Tuesday that starts next Tuesday? What is the one little thing you could do to make it better? Discuss. That's what it was. Brilliant. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That was fine. But there you go. Yeah, no. Oh, it's the microphone moments. Okay. Loving this. So, we just found out why it's still cold. Apparently, Cardiff University, that owns this place, is it Rebecca? No, you're not Rebecca. Kim, is it? Kerry. It began with a K. Kerry has been trying to sort this out, but it transpires in order. It's all the heating's all managed centrally. In order to get it turned up, there needs to be a requisition submitted to. So we're hoping by tomorrow. And actually what I was saying is that this is a classic example. And then, I was thinking, if the Vice-Chancellor was in the room of Cardiff Uni, he or she would be pretty unimpressed. But the thing is, design stuff by starting with the patient or the customer and work backwards. Start there, but too often what we do is design stuff that they're a byproduct, not the end point. So, what can you do? By the way, just that's so you know now. That's and I am sorry you're frozen. I would offer my waistcoat, but sacrificial burning. Oh, by the way, please don't set fire to stuff. I mean, it's not that bad. What can you do? What can you do that is small that you can change on Tuesday or today? Yes, please. There's one down here. Where's the other microphone? Thank you. Thank you. Just here, lady in grey, healthcare support worker. Lovely.
Just get one extra patient up, washed and dressed.
What, just one extra patient, did you say?
Well, just start with one extra patient.
Brilliant, just start with one.
Start with one.
And if each person started with one, you'd not be long before you had several hundreds. That is brilliant, thank you. That's a lovely, lovely example.
Just from a manual handling point of view, it's speaking to our trainers to remind them to say, when they're teaching people to maybe stand somebody up, I'll get this the right way around now, rather than say, put the emphasis on, I'm going to help you to stand, rather than we're going to stand you up. So I'm going to help you. So to say that to the patient, so the emphasis is on them standing rather than...
Yeah, so giving the patient agency.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like transport. If you say to a patient, will you need to get an ambulance home? They're going to go, oh God, I must be still sick, yes. Whereas if you say, how are you getting home? That brings in a conversation around getting the relatives to do so. So how many people, the reason they're waiting is because they're waiting for transport. So sometimes how we frame the question. Who else? we will throw a microphone at you, randomly.
In my ward, we have a day room where people can go and eat lunch, but inevitably no one does. They eat at their bedside. So I think probably just getting a few more patients up into the day room, and also just socialising a bit more in that context rather than eating by themselves.
Nice. And actually the power of that, you can just go to the IKEAs of the world, or B&Q, buy a little table, put a fork thing, and people sitting around it. And the power of that is people are getting fluids, they're getting better hydration. Particularly for women, is it Jude? Judith, we were talking about during the break. The men are not so good at this. We only have one feeling at a time, But the women generally, as your experience in the model ward, is very much better at socialising, but also they're getting better hydration. It's a social event rather than just simply a thing. So so that's a brilliant idea. And encouraging them to do so. Because the other thing that is an experience in hospital is loneliness. Holt Lundstedt, from her work in 2015, found that loneliness is associated with a 27% increase in early mortality. It's the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It has a bigger impact than diabetes or obesity. People die lonely. 500,000 people a week do not speak to another person. I was looking in the Irish Independent the other day, and there was a study that's just come out, and they found that there's older people who were buying stuff on Amazon just so the postman will come and do something. So you get someone to how about, does that feel awful sad to you? Because it does to me. And it's just, it also applies in hospitals. Because when they're behind that curtain and there's nobody around to talk to, or they have no visitors, at least sitting around a table means that they might discover that that person also lives in Neath, and maybe they could meet for a coffee in Greg's. So we, I think, have a social role. You know, this is the biggest employer in Cardiff. In fact, health is the biggest employer in most areas. You know, it's a small town, this place. So we have a social impact that is significant by reducing loneliness. Becky. That's okay? Okay. So somebody else, yes, please. Yep, I see it. Oh, there you are. Thank you again.
Going on from what the doctor said as well, we thought, like at the Gwent Hospital, that you walk to the trolley to get your food rather than the food be brought to your... Yes. I know logistically sometimes it can be a pain, but if there's the space, get people walking to you rather than taking the food to them.
That's a brilliant... Because it's mobilisation, but also it's giving people more choice. Because they're having a look at the food and thinking, oh, sweet Lord, no, you know? Or, actually, that looks great. So, yeah, that's a really simple one. That's a really lovely idea. What else? Because that's small and little. Yes, please. Oh, there you are first, and then... Little thing.
Yes, me
yeah, go ahead.
Hello. I think what I might do is enter one of my ward areas on a drip trolley and just whiz down the corridor and smile at everybody.
Love your work. Harry, can you capture that so we could put it on on your Facebook channel? I love that. That is gold. I saw another hand going. Yes, please.
I tend to speak to all the patients before they actually come in to see our clinicians in the team. So I was thinking that for most of my conversations it's very factual about making appointments, what to expect when you come in, but I'm actually going to make a point of asking them what their expectations are in coming into the service.
What matters to them. Anyone else? What about the people at the back? Because it's a bit like the back of the church. I know that's where the sinners live. Could you bring, Rebecca, just bring it right to the back. There's a lady with the lovely red bandana, wearing her Canadian outfit. She's a lumberjack, but she's okay.
Hello. So I'm in quite a privileged role. So I work as an activities coordinator on a ward. So I've got quite a nice role and it's quite open. So I've got a lot of sort of flexibility with change. And I tend to run groups. But I think one thing that I'd quite like to do is focus more on the individuals that are quieter, and maybe, because I don't know what it's like on everyone else's ward, but sometimes when people shout loudest, they get heard because they need the attention and, you know, the one-to-one support and whatever, but maybe the quiet people who are less focused on need that one-to-one chat, just to feel like they are a person as well.
Yep,
so, yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
And there is no, it's like, you know, introverts, there's no correlation between those who speak the loudest and those who have the best ideas. And 70% of people who work in healthcare are introverts. So we've done some DISC profile, and we've got thousands in that, and that's roughly what it works out at, about 70%. And when you think about it, if you look at DISC, DISC stands for dominant, influence, steady, conscientious, a behavioural profile. Dominant is people with, and we're all a blend of all of it, by the way, I should say, because I do a workshop, when I do the whole day version of this thing, I do a session in the afternoon that's about how do you work with really difficult people? How do you work with people you just don't get? I call it, how to work with people you want to kill. And DISC stands for dominance, which are, they're people who tend to be, you know, just come on, bullet points, just get on with it, you know, none of this fluffy stuff. Influencers are connected, they tell stories, they wear blue suede shoes, because every man needs one. I borrowed them off Elvis. And you know, they're connected with people. A steady, very gentle, very easygoing, humble, very private. Conscientious are detail, like it right, like it so, do the policy. So we are a blend of all of this. It'd be no surprise, my blend is influencer, steady, dominant, very little conscientious. But it means just because you have a preference, and they are about our preferences, doesn't mean you can't do stuff. So although it is not a preference of mine of conscientiousness, when it comes to books, so 7 books, the big emergency nursing book was 350,000 words, 600 pages. I know from doing a quick and dirty, I've written well over 1 million words just in the books. But when I'm getting a book into a proof stage, every page, every comma, every reference, every dot, every I, it's absolutely so. So you can go and do that. Just means you can't. But the majority of people who work in healthcare are steady and or conscientious. That tends to be the blend. As by the way, there's subsets. So physicians, GPs, pediatric doctors, and this applies to nurses and therapists, they tend to be steady, conscientious. Or conscientious is the cardinal space, and steady. Conscientious, steady. Surgeons tend to be conscientious, dominant, right? Conscientious, steady, conscientious, dominant. This is partly why a physician will take 5 minutes to get to the emergency department to take 4 hours to make a decision. A surgeon will take 4 hours to get to the emergency department to take 5 minutes to make a decision. And it's true, it makes sense, doesn't it? You know, a physician is dealing with complex comorbidities, they're trying to create a plan that's bespoke. Surgeons are coming in thinking, right, we need to open that belly. Because you don't really want a surgeon who's going to go, oh God, I hope I don't hurt them. You know, you want them kind of be decisive, getting stuck in there. And that's why we are a mix. But the predominant blend is steady conscientious. And there's two great things with that, you know, by the way, dominant influences tend to be on the extrovert scale. Steady, it doesn't mean you can't be, it's just, you know, introverts tend to be on the steady conscientious phase. That's how they plan to work out. So that means that 70% of people are introverts. What are introverts generally fantastic at doing, as a general rule of thumb? What are introverts really good at? Yes, fabulous listeners. And what is it that we are wanting to do when we're dealing with patients? Our real job is listening to their story. So, but there is a downside to it. What is something that introverts in general terms also dislike? Speaking out, speaking up, conflict. And that includes patient safety. So when you think about it, you know, when they've done a root cause analysis of a surgical event, it's rare that somebody didn't know. And what that's about is the communication gradient of people who didn't feel they could speak up. And Martin Bromley is a British Midlands pilot whose wife went in for a routine adenoidectomy, and she had that very rare anesthetic emergency, which is can't ventilate, can't intubate. And there was senior physicians, anesthetists, senior surgeons, but what happened is under the pressure of it, they lost track of time. And eventually, you know, she decompensated, she eventually died. And some days later. The theatre nurse saw what was happening, brought in a trachea kit, rang ICU, and then subsequently cancelled it, but didn't feel she could speak up. And Martin Bromley, being a pilot, his philosophy was, let's not blame people, let's find out what happened. And what it was a cultural thing. And if you just Google just a routine operation, I cannot over-recommend it to you. He's a very decent human being, really good man. He's had 2 young kids at the time. He's now remarried, got 1 or 2 more children of his own. And he leads a human factors group for the NHS in his own time. He's a really good man. So Martin Bromley, just another routine operation. But what that also underlines is the culture about people feeling safe enough to speak up. So all of you, and I'm sure in your heads there'll be things you can start doing and start changing. But one of the things we could all start doing is looking very carefully at our language. Because British Geriatric Society and Age UK did a fabulous piece of work about 3 or 4 years ago now, and they asked about frailty. And they asked the non-specialist clinicians, what springs to mind when you hear the word frailty? And this is the language they used. And then they asked members of the British public, what springs to mind when you hear the word frailty? And it was this. And when you look at the difference, you see that for the public, frailty is a much, much more pejorative term than through our clinical lens. And when you unpick it, in fact, it comes from medieval Latin and French, meaning fragile and poor morals. That's what the word fragile comes from. But you look at the unintended language of ageism that exists. You know, the demographic time bomb, as if we're waiting for all these people to just blow themselves up. It'll be a lot easier. Or the tsunami of aging as if they're just going to, you know, old people are going to save the health system, not harm it, because we have a compression of morbidity now. If you can expect, if chronic conditions last about 15 years and your life expectancy is 75, you will spend 1/5 of your life in ill health. But if you are going to be more likely to live to the age of 90, the chronic conditions will still be 15 years, but instead of it being 1/5 of your life, it's now 1/6 of your life, which means it's a compression of the morbidity. People are not living longer with chronic conditions, they are just living longer. Acopia, you know, seeing that, I used to see this on referrals, you know, a patient has acopia. Well, for a lot of older people, actually their biggest problem is aphylaxia. Or suffering from dementia. There's something that's so diminishing about just describing somebody as a sufferer. It's like AIDS victims or rape victims. It takes away the agency of survival. And David Oliver is a fantastic physician in Reading. He writes extensively and a lot of blogs, and he's conditioned with the BMJ. It's always in open access, so it's BMJ open. And he is, and I certainly commend you to Mancunian Medic is his hashtag, is his email. Oh, sorry, what I call Twitter handle. But phrases we should use and ban. But while we're at it, let's look at the language of the battlefield metaphors of the body. Because we talk about the war against cancer, battling disease, fighting infection, aggressive treatments, immune defenses. We turn people into an anvil on which a war is waged over their bodies. And it kind of troubles me when I see on my Facebook page or elsewhere where somebody has died, but what they're called is brave. Cancer killed both of my parents. But it wasn't about their bravery, because to call somebody brave implies a moral judgment that they died because they weren't brave enough. And a geriatrician friend of mine, her son died, a couple of years ago, he was about 7, Luke. And he talked at the very end of his life about his fighting cells for not being brave enough. Imagine a kid absorbing that notion of brave to a point where you're not brave enough. And it turns it into a moral judgment. It's not whether you're good or bad. It's just your death. And to diminish people by saying that they're brave or otherwise, I think diminishes them. And our language matters a lot. You look at the misogyny of some of the language around gynecology. I mean, I didn't know, for example, until some while ago now, that women could have an incompetent cervix. I did not know you probably had to do an exam to get competent. I mean, what's that about, you know? Or failure to progress. Or the mother who thinks she's a bad parent because her child is diagnosed with failure to thrive. Or the word failure is so prevalent. Heart failure, kidney failure, liver failure. The man who goes home thinking my heart is failing and could die any minute. Because our language is a different one. And what about failed discharge? Somebody who gets home for 2 days and comes back, that might be the very last time they see their grandchildren. And for them, that would be no failure. So the language of failure isn't okay either. So our language hugely, hugely matters. And, you know, when you want to make things happen, just keep it simple. You know, starting with 1 patient in a bed. It takes time, keep going, because the more you do it, the easier it gets. Get as many people involved, communicate it, especially the why, not the what and how, but the why it matters. Keep people involved, ask, you know, keep the questions so it'll be consistent. Visiting teams can change, you can have huddles, you can have, you know, the core questions. Does this person need to be in bed? Do they need to be in a bed in a hospital at all? Be clear in the notes what it's about. What are they waiting for? What's happening next? What needs to happen? Why not home? Why not today? Because there is no ward like home. But how do we make sure these things happen? And most of our practice, most of what we do is semi-automated. Most of what we do is semi-automated. I think many of you, and if you don't, it's not a biggie, but what I'd like you to do, if you have a writing pad in front of you, I'd just like you to write your name the way you normally do. Just write your signature. Just scribble it down just like you normally do. Some people are kindly passing theirs along, which is very kind. If you're doing it on a phone, that doesn't count. Now, how did that feel when you did that? Did you have to think about it? Very normal? Now do it with your non-dominant hand. Your signature with your non-dominant hand. And if you're in Clondoch, carry on. Now, what did that feel like? We were all looking at everyone else and saying, oh my God, some of you still writing. Did it feel clunky? Awkward? Did any of you think as you wrote it, God, I should have been a doctor? You can imagine a doctor's on strike. What do we want? We don't know, we can't read it. I'm a terrible writer, I'm shocking. Now, that felt clunky and hard, wasn't it? Now, in a manner of speaking, that was a metaphor for change. Because about neural pathways, if, heaven forbid, you were to break your dominant writing hand and all you had left was your non-dominant hand to write with, the more you do, the more the neural pathways change. When fMRI technology really developed in the 90s, and in the early 2000s, it was a massive transformation in occupational therapy practice. Because what we then realized is that the brain is plastic. And if you do very early aggressive intervention post-stroke, patients end up with very good outcomes. Because it used to be, they've had a down stroke, well, that's the end of their days. That's as far as it's going to be for functional capability. Now it's like, let's get in there and create new neural pathways. Because most of what we do is semi-habituated. Most of what we do is we don't think about it, because how many of you remember when we were all learning to drive, how hard it was? Especially if you had a gear stick. You had a steering wheel, you had a stick, and you had a wing mirror, and these three things here. How many of you have ever driven home and forgotten most of the journey? Because if you think about it, it's about cognitive load. If we put the same energy into everything we do, we'd be still rubbing 6 and Ks. So by semi-automating most of the stuff and reducing the cognitive load, that enables us to grow and develop and change. But it takes time, it takes practice, it takes effort. The next time you tie your shoelaces, note it. Because I bet you will probably you start on one or other foot. You will prefer one or other foot to start. Tonight when you're brushing your teeth, pick up your toothbrush as you normally do, then change hands. And then try and brush your teeth with the other hand. Because you don't think about this stuff, it's semi-automated. And what do Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, and it's not about money, Barack Obama, what do they all have in common? Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, Barack Obama, what do they all have in common? Pardon? Not ambidextrous, no. In fact, more US presidents are left-handed than the wider population. But that's a whole, I love the way you just put your thumb up saying, yes, I could be the US president. You know what? You could be doing a much better job. What else? What do they have in common? Clothes. Zuckerberg with T-shirts. Steve Jobs with his polo necks. Barack Obama always wearing black, a black suit. Can't remember about both. They all wear the same thing every day, and the reason is decision fatigue. There's only so many decisions in each of us each day. How many of you have you've driven home and you tell your loved one, listen, I'm just passing Waitrose or Tesco's. Do you want me to go in and get some tea? And they said, oh yes, I love it. I've had a terrible day. What would you like me to get? I don't care. How many of you had that experience? Do you know what? I've done thinking all day. My brain is full and my last brain rejected me. I am done. Because there's only so much. And in fact, if you are having an endoscopy, aim to have your endoscopy done in the morning rather than the afternoon, because more polyps are picked up in the morning than the afternoon. A study is, what's his name? Not Steven Pinker, I've forgotten his name. It's the science of timing. It's on the book list and you'll find it, but he's done a lot of this stuff. If you ever happen to find yourself in an Israeli jail, because I know you will at some point, I mean, you know, we all do. They did this lovely study that as they got closer and closer to lunchtime, more and more prisoners were found guilty. And then immediately after lunch, they were more likely to be found innocent until they got hungry again, because that hangry thing. So these are real things. It's a cognitive load. It ties into patient safety. Junior doctors will prescribe more antibiotics at the end of the day than in the morning, because there's only so many decisions you can take. So the cognitive load starts to matter when it comes to safety, and also long shifts. They have consequences. And finally, it's about you. And you is about your beliefs, the words you say to yourself, the thoughts you have, what you focus on. That becomes your reality. And who do you have more conversations with than anybody? Absolutely. We're having words with ourselves all the time, which is why it's really important to be kind. If you take only one thing away from this morning, it's talk to yourself kindly. And who are the hardest people on us? Ourselves, constantly, absolutely. And I talk about this a lot, and I practice it a lot. And Sunday morning, I was taking washing out of the machine, and I'd had shirts, and I thought, whose shirts are those two shirts? Now, these were white when they went in the washing machine. And I now have a pair of baby blue white shirts, you know. Now, the first reaction to myself was, oh, Brian, you knob. But then I thought, do you know what? Actually, I think this is going to go quite well, you know. And it is. And it goes with the shoes, thank you. And I put it on my Twitter handle, and actually people were commenting, oh, we've all done it. You know, it's true. But you know what? Having a conversation that's kind. A couple of weeks ago, and where she's gone now, the director of Vale Health, I was in Geneva at the World Congress of Physical Therapists, a big event. And Chloe Harris, they'd asked me in last October, would you come and speak at this? And I said, well, what about Chloe presenting? Because why should I get, you know? But anyway, in the last minute, she had to pull out, so I went in. And flying back from Paris, from back to Geneva, Paris, and I was busy doing, preparing talks, and I looked up at the clock, and I was in the lounge, and I'd missed my flight. And I thought, knob. And then I thought, do you know what? I could have a night in Paris. So I went to your man at the desk, and I chatted to him, and he said, oh, well, look, I'll tell you what, it's Air France, right? We won't charge you extra. Found it was quite late at night by then, so I wasn't going to get into town. But I found this little place called Yotel. It's in the airport. You turn on the lights in your room, and it's all purple. And it's like, oh my God, I wonder if this sort of boudoir would be. Yeah. And you go, and the following morning, going out to the hotel, and they've got this, it's a decent size, be about big place, right? And it's a library in Charles de Gaulle Airport. And I stopped for a while, and I was thinking, I would not have had this opportunity if I'd not missed my flight. So the conversations you have with yourself actually really matter, because they shape the lives we have. And, our mindset, it both propels us and it prevents us from fulfilling our potential. And Carol Dweck is a professor of psychology who came up with the notion of the growth mindset and the fixed mindset. Fixed mindset is, you only get so many brains and that's it. Your character is formed, that is fixed. I can't learn anything new because that's kind of, an old dog, new tricks. That's the fixed mindset. If something happens, it's something I can control. A growth mindset is you're constantly learning and evolving. If you get it wrong, it's on your path to mastery. Actually embracing change. That's a growth mindset. There's an opportunity. And I love that line from Oscar Wilde in A Woman of No Importance, which was, every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. It's the ultimate line in growth mindsets. But the three things, the factors, the environment, where and with whom you spend most of your time. If you were the brightest person among your mates, you're hanging with the wrong crowd. What you're exposed to, the positive and negative people around you, and also what you spend your time doing. Now, we've all had those days, thinking about negativity. We've all had those things where you're in the tea room, you're having a cup of tea, you're nice and early, and you look at the offshoot, you think, oh, God, oh, man, I forgot they were on. Then you hear them coming down the corridor. And they open the door, and the lights seem to go dim. I think of them as dementors. They kind of suck the energy out of a place, don't they? It's true, isn't it? But it's an attitude, it's a choice, and isn't it much more fun to work with Tigger than Eeyore? So we can choose. You know, you look at police, they're fantastic because they don't react even under enormous provocation, they respond. You get angry at me, I'm not obligated to get angry back. It's kind of a choice. Because what it relates to is the stories that we tell ourselves. And the stories are the neurological fast track to how we think, how we feel, and what you do, and what lives we live. And I love this, this line where it says, you know, we cannot create a world we can't imagine, and stories are the engines of our imaginations. I can't remember what, she was an American poet, and she said, the universe is not made of atoms, it's made of stories. And tens of thousands of years ago, there were women and men looking up at the starry sky, and they were joining those dots and turning them into Orion and Aries and the Big Dipper and all of those things. And all they were doing was creating stories and making sense out of astrological beings. Astronomical beings. But actually they were making them astrological, weren't they? You know, how's your moon for Venus? And it's really to do with these elements as well. It's the story that we tell ourselves. How do we speak to ourselves? What stories do we tell of ourselves? The public story, and I have to tell you, there's a lot of people having an amazing life on Facebook these days. Amazing. But actually, what's the story we need to tell? And I had somebody come to me yesterday, and she says, oh, I'm nobody, I'm just, and transpired she's a system leader. But I thought, wow, let's have a conversation about this. Because nobody's nobody. We all have a story, we all matter. It's not where you are, it's what you believe. It's what the story you tell yourself. What's your public story? What is the story that you need to tell? And what is your story? And in a full day session, you're doing that. But here's the questions to ask yourself constantly when you're deconstructing your stories. First of all, is this story I'm telling myself true? Is it serving me, telling myself this story? And finally, what do I need to believe? How do I go past myself beyond this thing that I keep telling myself? And a friend of mine, who's actually Welsh, her mother always used to say, she's stupid. She just grew up as a mother who told her she was stupid. Why that was about, now I don't know. And she said, you know, to her mother one day, many years later, she says, you know, Mum, I've got a PhD now, so it's Dr. Stupid. You know? But it's how we communicate, and sometimes, you know that thing about it's not what you say, it's how you say it? That can be distorted into the stories we've been told and how we've grown up in our lives. And the power of teachers to shape life experience. You know, when I was in Ireland, moved school, and I'd been in school for a very short time, started at Easter, and the teacher in my class, I had only been 9, and the teacher wrote to the handover notes to the teacher that in the next year. They wrote, only just arrived, seems intellectual. Now, I knew what that word meant, and I thought, oh, I better step into that, because that became my story. Does that kind of make sense? You know? And, yes, grew up in particularly straitened circumstances where there was more money there was more week left than there was money. And then on the 2nd of May, I was awarded an OBE for services to nursing and emergency care from Prince William at Buckingham Palace. And I'm proud of that because I'm a nurse. I'm proud of it because of emergency care. I'm proud of it because it means anyone can do this. We all can have a story that changes. We are not fixed in the stories we tell ourselves. Because actually, our perception of ourselves becomes a reality that's in it. That's the stuff that matters. So be brave. Stand up for what you believe in. Don't be afraid to dream out loud at high volume. Be prepared to risk ridicule. And don't be afraid to be vulnerable. You know, Brene Brown is any social workers in this morning? Nobody social workers. She's a social worker by training. She's got her doctorate in social work. She's a research professor at the University of Texas. And she has, again, one of the top 10 most viewed TED Talks anytime. And her story, her talk is about vulnerability. And it's brilliant. And she is very funny. She's written a load of books, Dare to Lead, Braving the Wilderness, all of this sort of stuff. But in her TED Talk, as her doctoral research, what she was doing was asking people about questions. And when she asked them about, tell me about love, quickly people would talk about when their heart had been broken. Tell me about happiness, and very quickly they would start talking about tough times, because bad experiences are much more sticky in our lives than the good experiences. No matter how you can have a run of really great days, and then you talk, oh, yesterday was a shocker, therefore they're all like that. Because we are wired to that kind of thinking. That's just a part of our human existence. But she also talked about what was it about some people, when she drilled back even deeper, she took several years to finish her doctorate, when she drilled even deeper into the research, she found about people who were vulnerable, because it was about vulnerability, but what it was also about was people who were the most successful felt they were still worthy of love. Because no matter how bad it got, if you feel you are worthy of being loved, you will survive anything. It's being unworthy, being hopeless is the root to so much mental well-being problems we face. When people give up hope. And Seamus Heaney, the Irish poet, is my favourite poet, but he wrote in one of his books, I think it might be Finders Keepers, he wrote about hope, and he wrote about Václav Havel, who was a Czech president, who was a poet who became Czech president. And Václav Havel talked about hope as something with tender roots that gets poisoned by cynicism. And we think about a place where we've worked with leaders, and the job of leaders, as Napoleon put it, leaders are dealers in hope. Because when a leader is hopeless, actually the whole team dissolves around them. Because without hope, actually there's no survival. There's no hope of it getting better. And hope isn't this, just like here, the work you are doing. Hope isn't the belief it's going to get better anyway. Hope is the belief that something's worth fighting for. Hope is the belief that it matters enough to do it anyway, whatever the outcome will be. That's what hope is about. So it's about not being afraid to believe in yourself, and it's not afraid to change what you think is impossible to possible. And in fact, if you put a little asterisk here, it becomes I'm possible. And every day, if you look at Safer, Red to Green, NPJ Paralysis, Get Up, Get Dressed and Moving, Home First, all of them are about creating social millionaires in Wales. Because you know what? There's some people who are so poor, all they have is money. But what social millionaires is about every day across NHS Wales, there's 1 million acts of kindness committed. So people don't feel hopeless, that they feel that their time is valued. They'll have no red wasted days. Their dignity, their understanding, their hope remained. And also, when it works, it's a reminder of why we came into healthcare. And I was speaking to my friend yesterday, and she had a really good day, and she sat for an hour with a person who was depressed. And this person wrote a letter. She said she had opened up to her, busy podiatrist, and she'd opened up to her this patient in ways that she'd never opened up to anyone before. And she took the trouble that afternoon to write a note to say, you know what, this person gave me hope and helped me realize I need help, and now I'm going to do something about it. How do you think my friend felt when she knew she mattered and made a difference? Because that's a reminder that no matter how tough it gets, that we matter. And why does the last 1,000 days matter? Well, in some ways, and actually not in some ways, in many ways, I'm more proud of originating the last 1,000 days than even NPJ Paralysis. And I don't own any of them. There's everyone's story. But it's owned to a group of geriatricians, nurses, doctors, therapists, managers, about lean. So doing a session on lean. And we're talking about all the types of waste: transport waste, inventory waste, motion waste, overproduction, overprocessing, direct defects, staff, waste. But we also talked about waiting, and absolutely, about 10 years ago, this idea popped out of my head out of nothing. And what it was about the last 1,000 days. Because if you're a man, you can expect to live to about the age of 78. And if you're a woman, you can expect to live to about the age of 83. But if you are a 75-year-old man or an 80-year-old woman, what have you got left? you have is 1,000 days. Now, I know that if you survive to the age of 10, your life expectancy goes up because you've survived your childhood. We also know that, it's well established now, people with the most birthdays live longest. Well, I'm a professor. It's quite brilliant, isn't it? But what is this place absolutely full of? Or in Languedoc or anywhere else? It's full of people in the last 1,000 days. 28% of medically admitted patients are in their last year of life. 48% of people over the age of 85 will die within 1 year of a hospital admission. Many of the people who are over 85 have had their last Christmas. And that's why I think all of this work about Win, who's your composite character, this person who has led a full life but actually wants to live more of it, but not in a hospital. Every day somebody spends longer in a hospital bed than they must is stealing their time. Every hour they wait to go home because they're waiting for something is stealing their time. Every hour they wait on an ambulance, waiting for an outpatient, it's stealing their time, which is why our purpose is a collective moral one to value their time, because while our time is busy and important, our patients' time is sacred. But there is another side to this, and it's about ourselves. Because please God, every one of us in this room will be that 75-year-old man or that 80-year-old woman. We will look back on our last 1,000 days. Because John Steinbeck, when he wrote Grapes of Wrath, there's a great, great character, and he wrote Grapes of Wrath about a much too recognizable, very troubled America of the 1930s. And there's a character called Man. There's a lovely line I read when I was 18. It always stuck with me, which was, far away in the future, the 1,000 lives we could have led are waiting for us to show up. But when we get there, it'll only have been one of them. Because we could have made different choices with our lives. Each of us could have chosen jobs where we wouldn't have had to work as hard. We could have chosen jobs where we wouldn't have had to miss anniversaries and family events and weekends going out with our friends. We could have chosen jobs where we would have had to earn more and actually work less. We could have chosen jobs we could walk out at 5 and not even think about a place till the end of Monday. We could have just done jobs that really we did the job and walked away. But instead what we did is we collectively chose a life of service. As individuals, we are part of something so much bigger than all of us. And when we look back on our own last 1,000 days, I think we'll all be able to say, you know what? I didn't get rich. I didn't get famous. But it mattered. I mattered to my family. I mattered to my community. I mattered to the profession I was so proud to call my profession, to my tribe. I mattered. And if you can say, I was loved, I mattered, and I was enough, you know you've had a good life. So what you do matters every single day. Getting one person up will matter to one person. And we all think, well, what difference do I make? And it's that thing, if that metaphor from James Gleick's book, Chaos. And he talks about the butterfly effect, where you've got a butterfly is beating its wings in the Amazon, and that tiniest little beating of the wings cumulatively becomes, with many butterflies, a small breeze. And those breezes become a wind. Those winds become gales. Those gales become hurricanes. And while not all of us can become a hurricane, every one of us can be a butterfly. So the difference we make matters. So why wouldn't you dream out loud at high volume to be the best UHB there can be? Why wouldn't you be the best performing anywhere, not just in Wales? Because it's not about burning platforms, it's about a burning ambition for better. That's what it's about. Because in the end of our days, what will matter most is not what we did, but the kind of person we were. We will be remembered not for our job title, but for our humanity. That's what we'll be remembered by. And our decency. And no matter how bright, how clever, how rich, how famous, in the end what matters most is your integrity, your decency, and how we treat other people. That's what matters most. And growing up in the west coast of Ireland, and now working in other sides of the world, all I knew is Australia was a fierce long way away, but I was very impressed that they had a kangaroo called Skippy that could talk. And when you're 7, that is very impressive indeed. But I also knew further on there was another place called New Zealand, which was so good, it took it the Irish, oh my God, until 2 years ago to finally beat them. The Welsh had actually beaten them before we did. He did it in like 1978 or something, years before us. But you know, we finally got there. And the All Blacks have never beaten us in Chicago, by the way. We only played them once. He was there. We beat. But you know what else? They had this amazing mountaineer called Sir Edmund Hillary. And when he died, I came across this quote, which I've loved ever since. And I think because it speaks to a truth to every one of us. Because you know what? It's not they that stop us. It's not the Lens. It's not the Judiths. It's not the Rebeccas or the Janes. It's not the chief medical officer. It's none of those things, the Steve Currys. Actually, the people who often stop us are ourselves. So it's about starting small, creating a small change that is a butterfly, that becomes a small breeze, that becomes a wind, that becomes a hurricane, that changes this health system for the better and changes the lives of people in this country for the better. Because in the end, it's not the mountain we conquer, but ourselves. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you. This is always where I really want to say, now go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Has anyone got any questions, heckles on the back of a $10 note or comments? Was there anything from Kerry? And we have done it 9 minutes early. So how good is that? Thank you so much. Thank you.